All right, committee's been called back to order. I see our bill sponsor is ready to go to talk about Senate Bill 290. Rep. Amabile, would you like to kick us off?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I am here today to present Senate Bill 290. And just in case anybody doesn't know, Senate Bill 290 is, we're running this bill today because the voters passed Prop 122 in November. And there were some things that were not quite aligned with how we operate in the state with a regulatory framework and with law enforcement and with various other agencies. And so Senate Bill 290 is implementing what was in Proposition 122. And I will say that we have really tried and I think succeeded at aligning the bill with what the voters voted for. And as a result, I think you will see today in testimony that a lot of different concerns have come up around the ballot measure. And so people are rightfully not happy with various aspects of the bill. But I would say that what they're really not happy with is various aspects of the ballot measure. And yet here we are, the ballot measure passed and is some expression of the will of the people in the state of Colorado. And it is a statewide measure. And this bill is implementing that. So you're going to hear from a lot of different groups about their concerns. And I will say that we made every attempt to address people's concerns. I do have several amendments that I'll be running today at the end. I was going to pass them out ahead of time, but there's some confusion about one of them, and so I don't want to get ahead of my skis on that. And I'll be talking about the amendments at the end. So one of the big things is that we moved, the ballot measure said this should be existing in DORA, and that doesn't really make sense for the way we operate. Ooh, that might be the fix. And so we've moved a lot of this over to, we've split the oversight between DORA and the Department of Revenue. It also was unclear about what's already in law and what would be now no longer in law and what would still be in law. So, for example, around kids' access to these products, it was a little bit unclear, and we wanted to clarify that, in fact, it still is against the law for children to have access to these products and to use these products, to be given the products or sold the products. The timeline for implementation was problematic, and so we've extended that out because there's extensive rulemaking in the regulatory side that has to be done carefully. And so there's some timeline changes. And there's some, so we decided to set up, the bill sets up a board, and that's already underway. That's taking place right now. But we decided to add another group because a lot of the tribal and indigenous communities were unhappy with the ballot measure. And so because there is a concern that this is an inappropriate use of these natural medicines, something which they feel is connected to their cultural and historic use, and that this is an infringement on that. So we've created a tribal and indigenous working group to engage with stakeholders and make sure their knowledge and experience is considered. And so those are kind of the highlights. I'd love to just take your questions, and And also, we do have a robust set of witnesses, and so there are some experts in various aspects of this, and they'd probably be better suited to answer real technical questions, but that's what I got. And and there will be a quiz. I want to make sure that you all read every word of this 90-page bill, so be prepared for that at the end.
Thank you, Representative Amable, for that concise and brief introduction to Senate Bill 290. Committee members, do we have any questions for our bill sponsor? Doesn't appear we do at this time. Okay. So with that, we'll go ahead and open up the witness testimony. And today, folks, I wanted to announce that because we have some 56 witnesses signed up to testify, we will be limiting testimony to 2 minutes instead of our usual 3 minutes today. And then questions for the various panels will be capped at 10 minutes. So I appreciate everybody sticking it out and being here for this committee hearing, and the opportunity to testify will be provided to everybody, but in the interest of getting everybody's time used most effectively, we will be putting in those 2 restrictions. So with that, we'll call up our first panel of witnesses. Patty Salazar, Mark Ferrandino, Molly Steinman, Tim Lane, and Eric Bergman. And Mr. Luzo, do we have any of those names that I just called on remote? So these are all here. So I apologize for the limited space here. We can certainly pull up a chair if you want, or
pull a chair.
Yeah. Okay, we're more than welcome to pull a chair over here. And I'm sure Director Ferrandino would be happy to share a microphone with you.
I'm in the batter's circle.
Okay, who would like to start us off? Please introduce yourself and who you represent, and we'll start your 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Patty Salazar. I serve as the Executive Director for the Department of Regulatory Agencies, and it's an honor to be before the House Finance Committee today. As you know, the DORA is the state's umbrella regulatory authority and the state's consumer protection agency. Proposition 122 placed the entire regulatory responsibility for implementation within our agency, and Senate Bill 290 will help us leverage the existing infrastructure and resources that we have across the state to better operationalize what the voters passed in November. In short, as Representative Mabile had indicated, DORA will continue to be responsible for licensing individual facilitators that are responsible for administering psilocybin and other natural medicines, and will also retain the Natural Medicine Advisory Board, which, as she noted, is currently underway and working through specific issues to provide the state with recommendations on how to implement this in an effective way that ensures accessibility, equity, and safety as we launch into this nascent industry. I should also note that the bulk of the responsibility with respect to the Healing Center regulation will move over to the Department of Revenue, which my colleague will speak to shortly, as well as engaging the Department of Public Health and Environment to, again, leverage all the existing resources that we have across the state. I should also note that there were some gaps in the drafting of Proposition 122. For example, there was no accounting for the Administrative Procedures Act, which, as you know, governs our ability to promulgate rules and ensures effective stakeholder engagement as we promulgate those rules and create the regulatory scheme for Prop 122. So I strongly encourage you to move this bill forward so that we could effectively implement the will of the voters. And I'll hand it over to my colleague. And of course, we'll be happy to answer any questions on behalf of the state.
Thank you. That was a nice segue. Director Ferrandino, if you would briefly introduce yourself, we'd be happy to start your 2 minutes for testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark Ferrandino, Executive Director of the Department of Revenue. It's great to be in front of the House Finance Committee. As my colleague talked about, the voters, as as it was written in 122, put all the responsibility into DORA. As we looked at it and tried to figure out how do we make sure that we can implement this with fidelity, but also to align with the strengths of different departments and different agencies, it made more sense for the Department of Revenue to take on the responsibility. Just like we have the responsibility for marijuana, we have built up expertise around both policy, science, and regulations on this type of area. So what you'll see there is that while DORA is holding the facilitator, all the other licensing, which is the Healing Center itself, is coming to the Department of Revenue. We also have in here the ability to do multiple license types. So we would have maybe the Healing Center, a cultivation, because you could imagine a place where they're growing one from multiple healing centers to try and make sure we're aligning, making this work across the sector. And so this allows us to do the rulemaking, to be able to have the oversight. It would be, we're looking at it being housed in conjunction with marijuana. It would be two different divisions, but looking how do we combine a structure around that. As many of you know, Dominique Mendiola has been working hard on this issue to make sure we're getting it right. She does amazing work on the cannabis space. We'll continue to do the work there as well as this. And as we look at it, we're lost my train of thought for a second. But we think this is the right way to approach this area, that we have the right oversight to be able to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. And if you folks will stand by for questions, we'll hear from the other witnesses and open it up for questions. So, Ms. Steinman, if you want to introduce yourself, we'll start your clock.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Molly Steineman, and I'm here on behalf of the Colorado Municipal League and its 270 cities and towns across the state. CML is in an amended position on Senate Bill 290. I want to start by thanking Representative Amable for the countless hours of work that went into this bill. While we appreciate and recognize the progress that has been made with the introduced version of this bill and some of the Senate amendments, there's still plenty of room for improvement. Even though the statute permits local governments to regulate the time, place, and manner of the operation of licenses, the breadth of the regulatory schemes and the ambiguous preemption language endangers how much authority that actually entails. Moreover, facilitators can perform services at other locations, like private residences, essentially skirting these regulations. The bill should ensure that there aren't loopholes to work outside the regulated structure. It is important to make sure that local governments have the authority to regulate these facilities and conduct occurring in their communities. Additionally, the broad definitions of personal use and ability to engage in unlicensed distribution of natural medicine does not appear to be subject to that authority. Reining in unregulated activity in a measured and reasonable way should be a priority of this bill. The broad strokes regulations in this bill may create a strong risk of conflict with laws enacted by home rule municipalities. To the extent that it is intentional, the League opposes preemption of the authority to regulate matters of local concern guaranteed by the Colorado Constitution. CML believes that there is considerable room for improvement on the time, place, and manner regulations within this bill. The vague and overbroad preemptions in the broad scheme of regulation in the statute, as enacted, create a risk that municipalities will be unable to enforce reasonable and legitimate exercises of this authority. CML believes that our concerns can be addressed by amending Senate Bill 290 to reinforce time, place, and manner allowances to close potential loopholes, clarify the definition of healthcare facility within the parameters of the bill, and clarify the definition of personal use. I'd like to conclude by saying that while we think that this bill could and should be amended to address our concerns, it made important necessary steps towards regulating it's upstanding up the regulatory structure for natural medicine, and we are very appreciative of those efforts. Thank you. I'm out of time.
Thank you. Mr. Lane?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Tim Lane. I'm with the Colorado District Attorney's Council. CDAC represents all 22 elected district attorneys throughout the state. I want to start by thanking the sponsors and the other people that have been involved in the drafting and the work on this bill for working with us predominantly to clarify the aspects surrounding the criminal provisions and their interrelation with the proposition and with current law. CDAC understands the passage of the proposition. We understand that vote. So at this time, we're not taking a position either for or against decriminalization, but rather to make sure that there is clarity around the criminal laws, that they work with the other criminal laws in aspect, and that we give as much ability for us to avoid unintended consequences, which may not have been what folks were voting for when this bill proposition was passed. We do still have some concerns about some aspects, including commercialization, concentrates, and the possibility of an emerging gray or black market. Those are obviously things that we are going to have to work through as we go forward. But the sections 31 forward, dealing with the criminal law section, we mainly wanted to make it abundantly clear what is and what is not allowed. What is not allowed is selling for remuneration, giving to children. What else? Sorry, excuse me. Is not allowed is doing either of those things when we're dealing with the cultivation and making sure that the cultivation is done in a way that's safe and keeps it away from people that are under 21. So we wanted to make sure that these aspects of the statute were very clear. There are, as Representative Amabile said, the two amendments, at least two amendments that are coming forward too that I'm aware of. One regarding the sealing aspects for sealing past convictions, that is to put it in line with what the voters put in place in the proposition, as well as the second amendment surrounding the use or the ability to use through the healing centers while on probation. So with that, I'm mainly here for any questions in regards to its integration with criminal law.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. And now we'll hear from Mr. Bergman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Good afternoon. Eric Bergman with Colorado Counties Incorporated. CCI actually is meeting tomorrow to take a position on the bill. Unfortunately, kind of at the tail end of the conversation, but I can tell you that we do appreciate all the sponsors' work and the governor's office work on this. We've had a lot of conversations with them over the last few months. I'm a veteran of the pot wars. I was on Governor Hickenlooper's task force back when we passed Amendment 64. I've been working on our regulatory scheme here in Colorado, and I think it's one of the best in the nation under Edie Ferrandino's watch and Dominic Mendiola's watch over there at the Med. So to the extent practicable, we really want to see us kind of emulate that same kind of framework if we can as we regulate recreational and medical psilocybin and these other substances. We do have a lot of black market concerns. A lot of our border counties are really concerned about trafficking, diversion going into other states, coming through their communities. We're pleased that the bill addresses that in the form of having at least some grow limits for residential grows, giving, I think, the probable cause for law enforcement, and then also ramping up some of the penalties for selling to minors. I will say that this is the kind of measure, we're going to be coming back every year and talking about this. So I think it's really important this bill passes this year and establishes some kind of guardrails and framework. We can come back next year and tweak it. Some might go too far, some not far enough. And I think as we get more data and we work with our law enforcement and others, we'll have a better picture as we go forward. It'll come into focus and we'll be able to do a good job. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and we do appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman. Committee, do we have any questions for any of these fine witnesses? Vice Chair Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I can't see far and I don't see your name. You mentioned time and place and manner, and I wanted you to elaborate a little bit more on that for me, because I've heard from community members who have issues with local control, and I'm trying to understand, is that where you were heading as part of your testimony? Thank you so much.
Ms. Steineman?
Thank you for that question, Representative Joseph. So CML's position in most things is that we would like to the extent possible exercise local control over regulated substances. And so I think in a perfect world, this natural medicine would be regulated the same way that marijuana and other regulated substances are controlled at the local level. However, within the parameters of Prop 122, it did allow local governments to regulate time, place, and manner of the facilities. Our concern is that the bill is very long, and there were some areas in which we don't see that time, place, and manner reinforced in the way that we believe the voters approved it, in the way that we believe in the intent of this bill is to essentially pass with that. So our desire is to kind of strengthen some parts within the bill where the time, place, and manner language exists. And then on the second side, there are some allowances within this bill, like the potential for facilitators to administer natural medicine within private residences, that we believe skirts around the time, place, manner regulations that we would like to see, because that activity would not be happening within the parameters of a licensed facility as we understand the bill.
Vice Chair Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wonder if I can pose this question to Mr. Ferrandino. Am I saying it right? Because if currently this bill creates a gap in the time, place, and manner regulation, why did that happen? Is it something that's being taken into account as part of the bill that says, hey, in order to implement this bill, there is this gap, but somehow it was not part of the ballot proposition or measure? Thank you.
Director Ferrandino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair. As we looked at the ballot initiative and tried to keep with fidelity with the ballot initiative, one thing was very clear throughout the campaign and throughout the conversation was that local government didn't have the right to ban the facilitation, the healing centers within their jurisdictions. In marijuana, when we passed Amendment 64, that was not the case. It was actually an ability for locals to decide if they wanted that, and there's still jurisdictions who are just starting to sell marijuana in their jurisdictions just this last election cycle. So as we looked at it, it's a delicate balance of how much control do you give, because you could see a local government that says you can meet on Tuesday at 3 o'clock to 3:05, and that's the only time you can meet, as long as it's a full moon. And that's just that's a ban, but not in the sense of a ban. So trying to find that balance. I will say, as Eric said, this is not the last time. This is the first time it's coming up. It was not the last time legislation will come. I think as we move through this, we will see more in this area and be able to better refine what the locals may do, what we can do through this. The other issue is the individual sharing and individual rights. So for example, as we heard, around their ability to go to someone's home and do that is in Prop 122. And so we are trying to stay close to what that was and what the voters intended. If we were to say, no, you can't do that, you have to do it in a licensed facility, that would be counter to what the voters had said.
Thank you.
Something on.
Yes, Mr. Bergman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also mention that just so everyone's clear, under Amendment 64, we're allowed to ban the businesses. We cannot ban possession, use, home grows, right? It's just the businesses that counties and cities are allowed to ban, just so in case anyone's, and I think really what we're seeking is the same thing on in this realm as well. It's nothing to do with personal possession, personal grows, and personal use and sharing and all that. It would not be a ban on that. It's just more on the business regulation of the businesses that are going to sprout from this. And we do believe that there will be. This is just chapter 1, scene 1. I think there will be dispensaries down the road. There will be grow operations, all the MIPS, all the things we see right now with cannabis. So we'll see how it goes. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Representative Valdez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here today. My question really goes to two aspects. One, we briefly touched on it before, but it's really of interest to me is the health and safety aspect, because we are talking about something that's cultivated, and obviously that's a concern. But I think more importantly, I want to hear, we obviously heard there's a concern, or there's this potential commercialization. What is the revenue impact? I'm asking a finance question on the finance committee. Go figure. Anyway, I really do want to know what is the potential long-term impact on revenue, and then what are our health and safety regulation structures just on a basic level that we think are going to protect the public?
Ms. Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Valdez. My colleague and I are going to split that question in two, and I'll take the first half related to health and safety. So as I mentioned earlier, the Natural Medicine Advisory Board has already been established. They've been confirmed by the Senate, and they're already starting to meet. We actually are having a meeting, I believe, every single day this week. We've divided the board up into several different aspects with respect to subcommittees, but we're also bringing in experts in various fields, including health equity, access, safety, qualifications, training, indigenous outreach, so on and so forth. And so the reason why I share all of that background is because that's exactly what they're going to be looking at, is around health and safety. How do we put parameters in place, not just for the licensure of the individuals that will be administering psilocybin, but also for the healing centers that will be eventually regulated by the Department of Revenue. I should also note that the first license will not be issued until December 31st for consideration of 2024. So we're nearly a year away with many respects to issuing the first license. So that'll give us much more insights along the way as we start to unpack these layers of issues to ensure that we are providing that access, but as well as safety for those that are choosing to go to a regulated healing center and participate in an experience with a licensed facilitator.
Director Ferrandino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to piggyback on that, it's one of the reasons why we looked at putting the healing centers into Department of Revenue. We have experience with the testing and working with CDPHE on the testing, all the different mold and other things that could be used to help deal with health and safety. On the finance issue for the Finance Committee, we've all gotten good at saying, or I'll probably mess it up, remuneration. The proposition was really clear that you could not sell psilocybin. I think there is some fear that that may be where it's going, but as of right now, with what the voters put in and what's in this bill, it can't be sold. There's no tax on it. Now there are services that are providing from the healing center and the facilitator are providing services. They can charge for that, but they're not charging for the actual product. And so we aren't seeing any additional revenue into the state for that.
Follow up? Mr. Bergman?
There was an amendment placed in the Senate, I think, about testing of the product by private companies now. It was Katie Wolf. I was just having to have a conversation with her about an amendment that went on there. But I think there's a process now where you can have people test your stuff. So before we even have testing facilities or some formal testing, there are some private ones out there, I believe. And I think there was an amendment put on the bill that allows for that to continue. But I'm on thin ice here.
Director Ferrandino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just on that, there are labs that can do testing. They aren't certified because we don't have the requirements or others for that. So I would just be clear of, our goal is to really focus on the license area, get those labs certified, and then work with the healing centers. Individuals may go, and it's, kind of buyer beware of what those licenses and those labs are doing. Hopefully they're, reputable labs they're using, but there is some risk because we're not certifying them because we're really focused on standing up the regulatory structure around the healing center, and that's our main priority.
Mr. Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One additional thing, Representative Valdez, I wanted to point out is in the criminal sections, there is a pretty steep prohibition on a person who is not licensed, so an individual that maybe is cultivating their own natural medicine, from using an inherently dangerous substance. So what you may have heard of with meth lab explosions or hash oil explosions that are done privately, there is a prohibition on using those things that has been added into the criminal section, and I think that's an important thing to acknowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. Committee, do we have any questions, any additional questions for this panel? I have a question, it's pretty historic to see 3 different agencies or departments within the state working collaboratively and trying to address this big issue. And I appreciate Director Ferrandino pointing out the difference between Amendment 64 and Proposition 122, and there is a difference there. But I'm wondering, what plans do you have for your various departments and CDPHE, which is also a part of this? What plans do you have to continue working to get these guidelines, regulations, and everything in place in a timely fashion? Ms. Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I noted, the Natural Medicine Advisory Board, we did make one amendment to that particular board, which includes the director of the Department of Revenue or their designee to join the conversation. And so I will say I appreciate your comment around our collaboration. That is one thing that we definitely know is going to be pivotal to the success of this regulatory program. And during this drafting process, I can also say I'm very confident in the fact that our agencies are going to be able to successfully collaborate going forward. And I know there's going to be a lot of interagency discussions, and those have already started to occur with CDPHE as well as other agencies that are impacted by this. And we've already started to do an analysis as to how this will impact other agencies to make sure that there's no blind spots as we start to implement this.
Thank you. Committee, any additional final questions? We've let them go a little bit over time, but this is a pretty knowledgeable panel we have here. Not seeing or hearing any, thank you all for coming, visiting the House Finance Committee today. And at the sponsor's request, we will be calling up our second panel of witnesses, all in an opposed position, a mix of in person and remote. So if we can track that along, it would be much appreciated. This time we'll call up Corey Gaines, Thomas Lopez, Autumn Brooks, Chris Heberer, and Mayor Sharon Thompson. And since I said we would try to do 6, we'll call up one more, and that would be Mrs. Melanie Rogers. So, Mr. Luza, do we have some folks from names called ready to testify online?
Yeah, Ms. Brooks is here, but Mr. Gaines is not online.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Brooks is here. Okay. So, who would like to kick us off? I think we should go with the mayor of the panel. So, Mayor Thompson, if you would briefly introduce yourself, we'd love to hear your testimony.
By the plug?
Yeah.
Or it plugs into the floor? Into the, no.
No, it's
Or it plugs into the table.
on the table.
Thank you. I think I got it. Okay. I'm glad you have a sign there. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, Representative Snyder. The City of Fountain is in an official opposed position that we have registered with our lobbyists. Our two concerns are local control and unintended consequences. We're asking that you amend the CML amendments that they were...
Mayor Thompson, if you could pull that microphone even a little closer, I think some folks are having trouble hearing
Okay,
you.
is that better?
Well, maybe turn it up even.
I can speak a little bit louder,
Oh,
but I
that's
usually
better.
don't. Okay. Would you like me to begin again?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. The City of Fountain is in an official opposed position. We have registered that with our lobbyists. Our two concerns are local control and unintended consequences. We're asking that you support the amendments and clarifications that CML is requesting to narrow the definition of it to avoid an argument of different things that are going on. You know, there's a lot of unintended consequences that come with things like time, manner, and place that are not well understood, and the term is not well defined. We're very concerned about the ideas, and we appreciate the input that they've really studied from the marijuana industry. You know, is in a lot of those, somebody can call them marijuana battles, and I think they were. And I can tell that they've put a lot of time and thought and learned from a lot of those. But we're really concerned about the unintended consequences, and we've already had an unintended consequence from this bill. We had to retire one of our canine officers, Officer Moody, who was assigned to Officer Becerra, who was the reason we were up here today, who lost his life in the line of duty. But we had to retire him because he could sniff out mushrooms, and that's costing us $14,000 right there to replace him as an officer. We actually have an officer back east right now training for to bring a new dog back that is not being able to sniff on mushrooms. So I think that's an unintended consequence. It's a big expense to our city. We're just concerned about things like that continuing to pop up. We're concerned about people that are driving under after treatment. We don't have anything to go with that. If it was I don't know, do you call it a DUI, or are they driving under the influence? You know, we don't know because we don't have any. I'm sorry, I'm speaking really fastly, so I'm losing my train of thought. We don't have things to show us consequences of side effects that may happen later. And let's just be honest, I believe this is going down the road of medical marijuana, medical recreation. I think we're headed down that path with this. I think we should just be honest with that from the get-go and all the unintended consequences that have kind of come from that too. So thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I ask you to support the CML clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And if you can stand with us, we'll hear from the other witnesses and open up for questions.
Thank you.
So
Well, he's my ride, so.
I'm not going anywhere.
okay. Well, if you'll introduce yourself, and we'll start your clock for a 2-minute testimony.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, it's good to see you both again. As the mayor mentioned, we saw all of you when we were up here a couple of weeks ago with our officer, and we really appreciate that. The Senate did it today, and we were able to bring his wife up, and it was very powerful for her. So we appreciate that. You know, I would just echo and concur. I'm testifying on behalf of CACP. We are an opposed unless amended position that is very similar.
Just a moment, sir. You didn't actually say your name. If you could say that for the record, that would be
Chief
helpful.
Chris Heberer.
Thank you, sir.
Chief of Police, City of Fountain.
We'll start over for you.
Great. Our opinion is that we are in an opposed unless amended position, very similar to CML, also what the mayor has talked about. Madam Vice Chair, you asked some very good clarifying questions on matter, place, and timing that I think we could all work together to get this better and safer and help us regulate it. As you all know, every community in Colorado is different, so the ability to localize control that's best for their community, I think, is important for the implementation. Obviously, as a law enforcement person, my concern, as we've seen in marijuana, is in the black market, is increased trafficking that make our roadways more dangerous. So however we can work together to make that safer and make it smarter and give our communities, especially if you're on the I-25 corridor, on the I-70, or you're a little place in the woods, you might want to regulate it different to make it safer for your community. Certainly, El Paso County, Mr. Chairman, you understand we lead the state in deaths, and that's a concern, right, as we get more distracted or DUI or impaired driving out there. So thank you for your time. I'd like to work together, our agencies. You asked some very good questions. The last board had some very intelligent people. It is rare to see three heads of government working together, and I would, law enforcement would like to work together with everyone to make it as good as we can, because we agree the citizens voted on 122, and we accept that. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Lopez, Thomas Lopez, sir, thank you for being here. And if you'll introduce yourself, we'll start your testimony clock.
Yes, my name is Tomas Lopez. I'm a chairman of the Native American Church of Teocalli Tepoyotlan here in the state of Colorado. And my concerns are a little different from the governmental standpoint. We're more, as Native people here, not willing to release that medicine that we use and we hold sacred into the general public and use by psychologists, any other medically inclined people. So you know nothing about the Native American Church. I would be willing to say that that's true of the panel. And it's also true of all of the constituents back here for or against. They know nothing about Native American Church. They know nothing about this medicine. They have families. We have a national organization. We have priests, high priests. We have reverends. We have prayer meetings. We have healing meetings. We have burial meetings. We have birthright meetings. We have naming ceremony meetings. All of these things that come in, with the limitations you want to put, I'm hearing, I don't really know nothing about this process here. But some of my nieces said, you want to speak on behalf of this medicine? Yes, I do. So this medicine here that we use, we call medicine. We don't call it a natural substance. It's a medicine to us. That's psilocybin, you call psilocybin. It's a natural medicine to people you call south of the border. Natural medicines. And those people, those elders, those grandmas, those grandpas, they know how to use this medicine. They don't have a limitation on giving to a child, but they know how to do that. They don't have a limitation on how much you can possess, but they possess it. And they use it to care for their people. When I have an old uncle, he said, they took everything from us, nephew. They took everything from us, but this peyote, this medicine, they didn't take from us. They tasted it. They didn't like it. It's bitter. They threw it away. You could have it. But that medicine helped preserve us, helped preserve our language, helped preserve our connection to the Creator. All of this takes place in the Native American Church. Native American Church of Oklahoma, Native American Church of South Dakota, Native American Church of Arizona, the National Native American Church of North America. Unfortunately, they only include United States of America, Canada. For some reason, they exclude the Mexican Indian people of this hemisphere and southern regions. But I'm against the usage of the peyote medicine. I can't speak too much on the psilocybin, on the ongo. I can't speak too much on that, as my grandpas didn't use that one. But I can speak on behalf of this peyote, what we call peyote, or they call pejuta wakan. I can speak on behalf of that. We do not want any pharmaceuticals. We do not want any business interests to have any kind of control or any kind of use over what we call Indian medicine.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez.
That's how I came to speak.
Thank you, sir. Melanie Rogers, would you introduce yourself, and we'll start the clock for you, ma'am.
Where's the clock? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, members of the House Finance Committee. My name is Melanie Rogers, and I'm representing myself today. I want to just echo what Mr. Lopez has just said. The complexities of this bill, including 5 compounds. We have mescaline, even though it says not peyote, it's also mescaline from other cacti. And as you can see, there's a lot of indigenous and Native American tribes really expressing their concerns. And they feel, just from my conversations, and I'm not speaking from them, and I'm just expressing what I'm hearing, is that they have not been properly consulted on this bill. And there's so many complexities with local control. And so I am a community organizer. I do social justice, racial justice work. I've helped pass bills in this legislature to expand medical cannabis access. And I'm asking, and I've rallied about 20 organizations to ask for a strike below, which would really just give this a big pause because it's so complex. And that is my message today. There's also things that I'm asking for, as far as we don't want criminalization. I'm happy to hear about the record sealing part, but there's a part of me that what I keep hearing is that we're in this pressure cooker, and yes, we voted on this, and it's just so complex, and more complexities are coming up. And so I don't, and then I'm told, it's going to pass anyway. And I get that it has to, but I'm just going to be here today in my own personal testimony and just echo that it's so complex. And we've got Native American tribes coming out with a press release soon. All eyes are on Colorado watching how we do this. I would rather not copy and paste cannabis legalization. I was in here before you talking about the social equity bill. The issues in the social equity bill are going to reflect what's going to be here today, because a lot of those groups were never properly stakeholdered. And so that is my biggest concern, and likely this will pass. But for my piece, and you got an email from me, I really want to say there's an educational packet in there with an indigenous perspective and a research study that can also educate you, because I'm sure this is very overwhelming for you as well. So please take a look at my emails, take a look at my educational packet, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. If you can stand by, we'll hear from another 1 or 2 witnesses and open it up for questions.
Thank you.
So do we have Autumn Brooks online? Ms. Brooks, if you'll introduce yourself, we'll start your testimony clock.
Thank you, committee, for the opportunity to speak in opposition of Senate Bill 290. I'm Autumn Brooks, a concerned citizen of Colorado. I'm against this bill because it appears that appropriate stakeholding was not done. Where are the patients in the bill and continuing conversation, let alone the drafting? For a bill that is a battle of 2 industries, shouldn't we have the input of the people it'll impact the most? For a bill with direct impact on the judicial system, why hasn't this bill gone to a judiciary committee? Where are and were the appropriate agencies of Denver in the talks of drafting this bill? Are there any representatives here now? How many people do you think walk through the doors, go through the Gold Dome, microdose before and maintain during their time here every day? I'm guessing you didn't even realize this is happening. I'm also guessing that you don't suspect a single person around you is utilizing psychedelics, and why should they have to disclose that? Nor should anybody under the dome be regulating how much a patient takes. Chances are you work with somebody who utilizes psychedelics every day and don't even know it. It's time to rethink perceptions on the subject. Look around here in the halls, in the common public and employee areas, that tea, that vitamin, that smoothie, those gummies, etc., which someone may be actively consuming with their natural medicine. Are we to ban these legal products because they might contain natural medicine? Or maybe we should just cite people for that homemade dressing they've poured on there and poured that is possibly infused with a product for testing. I'm also want to emphasize others' testimony that was given before in the last committee of the fact that funding is not completely designated for this purpose, nor is it carried over. I humbly request that we go back to the drawing board and do it right. Please vote no on Senate Bill 290.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. And if you can stand by, we'll see if Corey Gaines ever got online. Has not. Okay, so this is our first panel of 5 witnesses, and we'll begin 10 minutes for questioning here. Does anybody on the committee have a question for any of these witnesses? Rep. Marshall.
Yeah, I'm just curious for like the town of Fountain and the chief. You're in an opposed position, but we really have no choice but to pass something. So why are you in an opposed position?
It was opposed with amendments, concurrent with CML.
Yeah.
So, along the same lines, I understand your answer, but you realize Proposition 122 passed, and that puts the state, I shouldn't say us, but the state in a position of having to follow the will of the voters.
Absolutely.
So what you're saying is that the way we're doing it is not an acceptable way to you.
I think between the intent of the 122, we fully accept 100%. Number 2, by the bill, people that wrote this bill, this body here today, CML has proposed some amendments that CACP has reviewed. We wrote a position paper on it that shows some things that we could think we could do a little better on to make it better. And that way we have all 3 entities, the state body, the citizens, CML, the 3 bodies in law enforcement, trying to do it as best we can. Some of the concerns, it's fast, we have to do it. I think if, collaboratively, we can rule out some of the intended consequences, some of the areas we have concerns with increased criminal byproduct behavior. But I think, we have to do it, and we want to work together. So it's opposed unless amended, and we want to amend it because it's going to pass.
Thank you. Mayor Thompson?
There isn't an option on the lobbyist form to do oppose unless amended. It's support, amend, or oppose, right? And so we decided to go with the stronger position of oppose because we really wanted to have some conversation at the table of where the amendments were.
Thank you. Committee, any additional questions for these fine witnesses? I don't see any. Thank you all very much for being here today, and thank you for being online. With that, we will call up our next panel of witnesses. All are listed in this case in a 4 position. So we'll call up Dr. Will Vanderveer, Mr. Jay Fisher, Dr. Kristen Spear, Natasha Poinsatti, and Adam Casey, who is remote. Give everybody a moment to get settled in, and if you haven't testified here before, we have a very complicated microphone system, so just please make sure that the little gray little button on the table itself, where it plugs into the table, is green. And with that, who would like to go first?
I can go first.
Great, thank you. Introduce yourself, and we'll start your clock.
Thanks, Chairman Snyder. Mr. Chair Snyder, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to share my testimony with you. My name is Dr. Will Vanderveer. I am in support of this bill. I'm a psychiatrist in Boulder, medical doctor, trained in psychiatry at CU Anschutz. I trained at the Denver VA, the University Hospital here, Denver General Hospital, and I'm a concerned citizen. I've spent over 2 decades and 20,000 hours working with psychiatric patients, dealing with significant, severe, sometimes suicidal conditions, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and addiction. I've prescribed FDA-approved treatments for thousands of people in a wide range of different settings and conditions. My attempts to help people get well with conventional FDA-approved treatments have failed too many people. I joined a team of researchers studying psychedelic-assisted therapy for PTSD in 2012, and I spent 6 years in a clinical research setting as an FDA-approved clinical trial physician based in Boulder. In our work, we treated veterans with PTSD and others with PTSD, averaging 29 years of struggle with severe symptoms. And of these folks that we treated, 67% no longer met criteria for PTSD at the end of the trial. And at the 1-year follow-up, the results were even better than 67%. So one of the things that I'm excited about with these treatments is how durable they are after just a few exposures. Limitations of access to care in Colorado are serious. I've had patients die by suicide for lack of access to care and also for lack of access to effectiveness of treatments that are currently approved. The research on psilocybin shows that it's very safe when given in the right circumstances with the right support. Psilocybin treatment is usually a handful of sessions, 2 or 3 sessions, 6 to 8 hours long. People have durable results. There's no addictive qualities to psilocybin. And just like any dangerous situation, whether it's driving or alcohol use, this is not for children, and everything has a risk. This is not a panacea. So I'm for this bill because Coloradoans need this. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll jump right to Mr. J. Fisher. Is that you, sir? If you'll introduce yourself, we'll start your testimony clock.
Sure. Thank you very much. My name is Jay Fisher. I'm here on behalf of an organization called Law Enforcement Action Partnership, more colloquially known as LEAP. I'm a former appellate prosecutor and assistant attorney general here in Colorado. I support 290 because it would support officer mental health and provide alternative solutions for civilians as well. LEAP is a nonprofit group of police, prosecutors, judges, and other criminal justice professionals who speak from firsthand experience. Our mission is to make communities safer by focusing law enforcement resources on the greatest threats to public safety and to work toward healing police-community relations. Patrol officers are called every day to deal with people having mental health crises. Treatment-resistant depression alone impacts millions of Americans, and individuals with untreated mental health issues are 16 times more likely to lose their life during a police encounter than the average person. Mental health is also a personal issue for many police officers. Because of the trauma that officers face, they're 54 times more likely to commit suicide than the general public and twice as likely to experience clinical depression. Psilocybin is a promising approach to manage mental health issues. Early research demonstrates that clinical psilocybin interventions offer hope for people living with chronic psychological distress. However, for decades, state laws have prevented the study and the use of psilocybin to aid in the treatment of psychiatric disorders. Any officer who's interested in trying psilocybin to address mental health concerns would be ridiculed, fired, or potentially even arrested under current law. 290 is a thoughtful plan to provide access to carefully regulated therapy. The bill would create the Division of Natural Medicine within the Department of Revenue for regulation and licensing purposes. 290 would also provide important definitions and clarity so that the state can effectively implement Proposition 122.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Much appreciated. Dr. Kristen Spear, if you'll introduce yourself and who you may represent, we'll be glad to hear your testimony.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Dr. Kristen Spear. I'm a residency-trained, board-certified clinical pharmacist. I sit on the board of directors for the Psychedelic Pharmacist Association, a nonprofit that I also co-founded. But I'm representing myself today. Contrary to many who've testified particularly in front of the Senate committee and possibly today, I have not personally used psychedelic or plant medicine. The pharmacist is the drug expert, but fortunately we don't try every drug to know how safe or effective they might be. But I am thankful to live in a progressive state that would not penalize me or my license if I decided plant medicine was the best recourse. Nonetheless, I am in favor of this bill. I'll mention 3 reasons today. Psychedelic plant medicines, when unadulterated, are relatively safe. Okay, pharmacist, what does that mean? By relatively safe, I mean no substance or even FDA-approved medication is 100% risk-free, including those in this bill. They do come with risks, but millions of people have used these substances illicitly or outside of any regulation, and they have fared well. Compare that to the millions of people who have used opioids and other substances illicitly. They have not fared well. Growing evidence continues to demonstrate an acceptable safety profile of psychedelic plant medicines. It is well documented that harms from psychedelic use generally rank much lower than the harms of other illicit or legal controlled substances. Psilocybin in particular displays a remarkable physical safety profile, and it lacks a known lethal dose in humans. And the safety of these plant medicines is optimized when they're administered with proper screening, preparation, and integration, which this bill thoughtfully draws out. Number 2, psychedelics are effective. I'm not going to go too much into this, but I'll add my weight to the message that they work and we need them. And from a pharmacist perspective, nothing else we have works like they do. Nothing else.
Thank you, Doctor. We very much appreciate your testimony. We'll call up Natasha Poinsade. I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right, but if you'll introduce yourself, we'll start your clock.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify. My name is Natasha Poinsett, and I represent the Healing Advocacy Fund. I'm testifying in support of the bill. First of all, I want to thank the sponsors and the administration for the enormous amount of work that has gone into the bill. It's a complex undertaking that's really important to effective implementation. So thank you all for making this a priority and seeking to balance the diverse perspectives that are out there. In November 2022, Colorado voters approved Proposition 122, which allows regulated access for adults 21 and older to natural psychedelic medicines, including psilocybin mushrooms, that show promise in treating serious mental health conditions. Proposition 122 also removes criminal penalties for personal possession and healing uses of natural psychedelic medicines because nobody deserves to be criminalized for trying to heal. Colorado is experiencing a mental health crisis, and many Coloradans struggling with conditions like depression, addiction, and PTSD have been unable to find healing through currently available treatments. We've seen the research from medical institutions such as Johns Hopkins, UCLA, and NYU showing that natural psychedelic medicines can be a powerful tool for healing when other options aren't working. Proposition 122 allows Coloradans to safely access these medicines at licensed facilities with the guidance of trained and licensed facilitators. The mission of the Healing Advocacy Fund in Colorado is to support safe, equitable, and effective implementation and ensure that the measure is implemented with fidelity. Senate Bill 290 is an important next step towards this goal. The bill complements and implements voter-approved Prop 122 to make sure Colorado creates a regulated psychedelic therapy system that's safe, effective, equitable, and accessible for those who can safely benefit. In order to effectively combat Colorado's mental health crisis, we must open new and innovative pathways to healing. I want to thank members of the legislature for considering community testimony in crafting this bill and making a number of important changes to ensure community healing and patient and public safety. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you folks will stand by, we have 2 more witnesses remote for this panel, and then we'll open it up to questions. So with that, we'll call up Mr. Adam Casey. We don't have Mr. Casey. How about Gabriella G.? Ms. G, if you're ready to go, if you'd introduce yourself, then we'll start your clock. And I apologize, I only have the letter G for a last name.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gabriela Galindo. I just want to remind everybody that we are in the homeland of the Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Mexican people, and that power and privilege exercised here today has been built on the attempted genocide of Native peoples from the tip of Alaska to Chile. And this bill here in particular also continues that pattern of systemic harm on Native peoples. I belong to the Mexica community in, of all places, Boulder, Colorado. My partner and I help organize our Aztec dance group, Grupo Tawitzcavi, and I'm connected to the Mexica, Chicano, and Native communities in the Front Range of Colorado, New Mexico, and Tenochtitlan, Mexico City. I'm also a military veteran and a veteran who found healing through food and through natural medicines, through food and herbal medicine. I don't have combat PTSD, but I do have intergenerational trauma from these colonial and capitalistic systems that did everything to extinguish a native way of life and continue to do that. And these same systems have privatized water, land, soil, food, and call them natural resources and shelter. And these are all basic human needs, by the way. These systems decimate everything they touch. And I stand in solidarity with the elders and the Native communities here will speak to removing mescaline from this bill. We have not been properly consulted with, and these are our own medicines, and this continues, again, this pattern of systemic harm. I want to remind you about the Colorado River and the implications that these systems have on this water system. In 164 years since the gold rush, the Colorado River is now endangered, and that has been at the exclusion of the wisdom of indigenous communities. And I didn't think I had the full 2 minutes. Anyhow.
Just a little over, but thank you very much. And we would like to open it up for questions from the committee right now. So those are our 5 witnesses. Committee, do we have any questions for these witnesses? Vice Chair Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe this question is for Ms. Galindo. My understanding, as I was reading through the bill and the fiscal note, it seems that there is a working group of Native Americans, and I understand the bill may not be, how do I put it, 100% as you hoped it to be, but has there been an opportunity, whether you as Native American or through other Native American groups, to give feedback as part of this bill?
Ms. Galindo?
Right. So I was involved in this effort starting up last year, about a year and a half ago, with many of my colleagues that you see here today. And we, even though we kept hearing like, oh, we want to involve you in this work, we were really excluded and ignored. And I want to bring in, I work with the City of Boulder and CU Boulder, and we know that the communities are the experts of their needs, not the other way around. And in this case, we've been lumped into BIPOC and marginalized communities as if our needs are the same, but this specifically is a Native American and indigenous concern of people specifically in tribes working with these medicines. So under the lens of equity and social justice and, removing these barriers to access, but our concerns are completely different from these communities, and they cannot represent us. And so I'm advocating for this. I'm very happy to see this Indigenous and Tribal Nations Working Group, and I'm advocating that we lead that. These are our ancestral medicines.
Okay. Thank you. Another question? Committee? So I have a question. I guess I would direct it to Dr. Vanderveer and Dr. Spear. And I think you touched on it. And it's the same problem I had with the legalization of cannabis movement, that we went through decades of time where the federal government prohibited any type of research or study into the effects of these substances. And it's very hard. I consider myself, for better or worse, a science-based, evidentiary-based legislator, and that's really difficult because we don't have that body of knowledge that would help to make an informed decision. So I think I notice in this area, there does seem to be more trials, more studies going on, so maybe you could enlighten me if I'm on the right track there. Dr. Vanderveer, or...
You may have some things to say too. I will just say that phase 2 studies have been completed on psilocybin for depression. There are many other conditions, indications that are being studied with psilocybin currently. The phase 3 medical trials, that's a gold standard, that is the end of the FDA approval process, is expected to get started with psilocybin for depression in the next few months. And so that whole process is underway. And we already have a big body of safety evidence, but we don't have a lot of these bigger trials to really, completely and without question, demonstrate the effectiveness. So that will happen. And there are multiple groups worldwide that are initiating those trials. So we expect to have that evidence very soon.
Thank you. And Dr. Spear?
Yes, I'll echo Dr. Vanderveer. Right now, the research is growing. We have to start somewhere, and it's been majorly positive for the most part. I will say that from my perspective, we have something even better than research, and it's the millions of people using it illicitly and through legacy cultures that have done fine with it without regulation on their own. So I'll end on that.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions? Doesn't appear to anymore, so thank you all for being here. Thank you, Ms. Galindo, for tuning in, and we appreciate your time. So, folks, we're going to continue our process of rotating for and against. So our next panel, I believe we only have 3 people who signed up as against. So we'll take 3 of those and then 3 folks in an amend position. So we'll call up Dr. Libby Stoit, Dawn Reinfield, Mrs. Jessica Kodak, Susan Sagi, and Kristen Nash. Is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and Lisa Hudson. Okay. Would you like to start us off, introduce yourself, and we'll start your testimony clock.
Thank you, Chairman Snyder and the rest of the committee, for the opportunity to address you today. My name is Dawn Reinfeld, and I am the Executive Director of Blue Rising. We are in opposition, unless amended, for SB 290. In November, Prop 122 was marketed to the people of Colorado as a tightly regulated healing center model that would allow trained and licensed practitioners to do guided and controlled use of psilocybin to help veterans with PTSD. What was never mentioned in their marketing was that it would also create a totally unregulated shadow market of 5 psychedelics that could be shared, unlimitedly grown, and transported across the state. It also allows for unlicensed healers to set up websites and charge for services of healing. This was in none of the $20 million of out-of-state money that was spent on advertising. We believe this bill is woefully inadequate to meet the moment. We know our lessons with high-potency THC marijuana, that if we tell a generation of our youth that these drugs are safe and are medicine, without the science and data to support that, and regulations that provide adequate warnings and oversight, as well as limit access to young people, that there will be enormous harms to our youth and young adults. We support the efforts of the Native Coalition Against Exploitation and Erasure in their efforts to remove mescaline from this bill. The state of Colorado owes them to respect their request. This legislation should also include a ban on concentrates, a ban on cross-breeding of these plants, and a personal possession limit. How are we to prevent Colorado from becoming the leader in trafficking of psychedelics across the nation if there is no personal possession limit? The state of Colorado is willing yet again to use the children of our state as the guinea pigs of the world for another drug that has limited science and research to support widespread use. I fear we will be back here next year with families whose kids have been harmed or died due to the state's unwillingness to rein in yet again another profit-driven industry. Do the right thing for our kids.
Thank you for your testimony. If you would also introduce yourself, we'll start your clock for testimony.
Thank you. My name is Jessica Kadash. I am a cultural and medical anthropologist and have been studying the psychedelic movement for the past 8 years. I also held a seat on the steering committee for Proposition 122, and I contributed to the drafting of Proposition 122. And I am here representing myself and my Colorado-based think tank, Alchemy Consulting and Development. I want to say thank you to everyone involved in writing this bill. I acknowledge the attention that has gone into listening to what the voters want, though I am also here to testify against Senate Bill 290 and ask for a strike below as well. As many of my colleagues here today have named, the bill is 87 pages and has not given stakeholders the necessary amount of time to gather input and feedback on the bill. Premature limitations in advance of empirical evidence that these limitations are warranted will encourage diversion, gray, and black markets. Until there is an insurance system supporting affordable access to facilitated care to Coloradans, limitations on personal use components of the bill removes our only prospect for affordable opportunities for relief from chronic conditions. I'd like to share that my firm completed a survey of 100 plus individuals in Colorado interested in plant medicine under Proposition 122, and data speaks loudly where the top 73% of people surveyed expressed concerns around unfair laws and regulation around plant medicines and a lack of access to plant medicines. Proposition 122 is a pioneering hybrid model where people can access these medicines through regulated access and community healing models. I ask that you prioritize listening to the people here today who are proposing an open community task force in order to gather the needs and desires of the people who will be most impacted by this bill, particularly Indigenous communities, and do this prior to submitting a bill to implement Proposition 122 and not after, which is what was proposed. If you check your emails, you will see more information on this request.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
We'll move on to Dr. Libby Stoit. Is she online? Great. Thank you, Doctor. If you'll introduce yourself, we'll start the clock for your testimony.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate being allowed to testify. My name is Libby Stout. I'm a board-certified addiction psychiatrist. And I believe this bill has not gone far enough. I think there's many things that need to be done to amend to this bill. I know that this is about natural medicine, and I think that there needs to be something about not creating concentrates. We should learn from our experience with marijuana. Marijuana was a natural plant. The products we have now are no longer natural. Marijuana used to be classed as a hallucinogen. It was not addicting. And now we have these products that are highly potent and extremely addicting. I don't know what will happen with the psychedelics in that regard. These are not benign drugs. I have worked with many people who have had bad reactions to using them by themselves, up to death. And I just want to point out that there are studies, and as a psychiatrist, I'm very excited about the potential of this. I just think that the research is in its infancy, and we don't have enough knowledge. Because if you look at the largest phase 2 trial, it was done on depression, severe treatment-resistant depression. They used 3 doses, 25 milligrams, which was basically a synthetic formulation, so that's a higher potency dose, 10 milligrams and 1 milligram. And of course, it worked better at the higher potency, at that potency, 25 milligrams, but there were serious side effects, including increased suicidal ideation, increased self-harm effect, things, And so, and these are done in very controlled situations where the patients meet with a therapist multiple times before they're dosed and after they're dosed. 2 therapists are with them their entire time during the treatment, which can be up to 8 hours, which is the way it should be done. But this bill basically allows people to do it individually on their own. And if we don't control potency, we're looking at a really scary outcome, I'm afraid.
Thank you,
Thank you
Doctor.
very much.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll go ahead and go right to Susan Sagi. Do we have her online? We don't. Okay. I see we have the other 2, so we'll call Kristen Nash. If you will introduce yourself and who you might represent, we will start your testimony clock.
Hi, thank you, Chairman, and the rest of the committee. I'm Kristen Nash. I'm here representing myself, and I'm asking you to please amend Senate Bill 23290. We keep hearing about the benefits of psychedelics, but I want to talk to you about the risks. 3 years ago, I lost my 21-year-old son, Will, to an accident due to psilocybin-induced hallucinations. Will was a college senior 2 months from graduating with the rest of his life just in front of him. Like others, Will believed that psychedelics are safe enough, and we keep hearing this. We don't have a family history of mental illness. He was with a small group of best friends in his own home, yet things went sideways. Will had a severe adverse reaction that led to a psychosis. He was terrified. His friends were terrified. Campus public safety officers were called to the scene. And at some point, Will grabbed a jar of protein powder and poured it onto his mouth as if drinking, and he choked. So, it could have been a knife. It could have been a balcony. In that state of mind, an ordinary object turned deadly for my son. So he and his friends believed what they read, that mushrooms were among the least harmful drugs, natural medicine, you can't overdose, non-addictive are the things they heard. A worst-case scenario was not in their awareness. So as we discuss how to make these powerful, potent substances accessible, we must acknowledge the risks, and we need guardrails baked into our public policy to prevent further tragedies. We need measures to prevent youth access, public information and education campaigns, first responder training, and we need public health data. And I'm so glad the doctor before me pointed to the risk profile in the phase 2 study. I urge you to look at that New England Journal of Medicine article, because there were significant risks seen there, and these need to be acknowledged, not swept under the carpet. So I urge you, please, add guardrails to the bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Nash, and I'm extremely sorry to hear about your family's tragedy there, and we really appreciate you testifying. Now we'll hear from Lisa Hudson. Ms. Hudson, if you introduce yourself, we'll start your clock.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Senate Finance Committee, for the opportunity to address you today. My name is Lisa Hudson, and I am here representing myself, my son, and my family to amend Senate Bill 23290. On Friday night, January 24th in 2020, my sparkly 16-year-old son, Shane, experimented with a large amount of mushrooms alone in our home while we were sleeping. Shane woke us up just after midnight in a highly altered and euphoric hallucinogenic state. He could not respond to any of my questions, but over and over he iterated that he was talking to God, understood the meaning of life, and that life was all about love. Concerned, my husband and I decided to take Shane to the ER, and as we were getting ready to go, Shane ran down our stairs and jumped off our desk with his arms outstretched, shouting, "I've got this," like he was reaching out to catch a fly ball. Shane died in his father's arms as I called 911. I later found out that Shane had researched the God's dose of mushrooms online, a therapeutic dose that he claimed would let you speak directly to God and learn the meaning of life. Some of Shane's friends knew he was taking mushrooms that night, but he assured them that nothing bad ever happens on mushrooms, and they never have ever could have anticipated the horrible and heartbreaking consequences that were the result. Shane started experimenting with marijuana his freshman year, using high-potency edibles and vape pens that were easily accessible at his school and on social media. He quickly became addicted, and we struggled to control it. During his sophomore year, Shane stopped using marijuana to our relief. He had to write a school report on the effects of marijuana on the teenage brain, and seeing the Colorado data on the rising rates of teen suicide and marijuana-induced psychosis were huge motivators for him to stop. But shortly after stopping, Shane turned to mushrooms, thinking they were therapeutic and harmless. I truly believe that Shane's use of high-potency marijuana gave him the false sense of security that he could handle mushrooms easily, no matter how big the dose. Shane was a bright, loving, and joy-filled teen who actively sought adventure and fun. He had a huge smile, a ton of friends, and loved to laugh and make others laugh, and we all miss him so much. Thank you for the opportunity to share my son's story today. Shane's experimentation with mushrooms had unnecessary tragic consequences, which we hope other families will be able to avoid.
Thank you, Ms. Hudson, for your testimony, and my sincere condolences to you and your family for such a tragedy. Folks, let's see, this is the last of the testimony on this panel, so we'll open it up for questions. Do we have any questions for these witnesses, committee? Not seeing any from the committee members. I did have a quick question for Dr. Let's see, kind of lost my place here. But so you're signed up in an amend position, I believe, but you seem to have strong reservations about the existing bill. Are you calling for a strike below, a new draft of a bill, or amends to the existing Bill 290? That's right.
Mr. Chair, I would like to see amendments to the bill.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have some that I think the bill sponsor will be talking about here in a little bit. So any other questions for this panel? Representative Marshall.
Yeah, to the first witness, I was just curious because I heard you in your testimony say we should ban mescaline, but that was specifically authorized in the referendum. So there really is no choice but for us to authorize that.
Well, the referendum was not constitutional. It's statutory. And from what I understand, the Indigenous Coalition feels that they weren't adequately part of the conversation. And when they were, their perspective was not respected. And I think that the state of Colorado has tried in many different ways to make amends for the wrongs that have been done. And I think that if this coalition is saying that including mescaline intrudes on their peyote rights, that we should listen to them. So I think it should be amended out.
Thank you. Committee, any additional questions? I just had a quick question for you, Ms. Kadich. Kadash, thank you. So you were actually a participant in some of the early study groups, and yet you come here today in an against position. So I just wondered if you could reiterate what path are you recommending?
Yes, from what I'm hearing from the community here, the desire is to have more input from community stakeholders, including Indigenous communities, prior to writing a bill, not after. The bill includes a task force specifically for Indigenous communities, but that's after the bill is already written. And what we've seen is a desire for specifically Indigenous communities and other stakeholders to be consulted prior to a bill being written.
Okay, thank you. Committee, one last opportunity for questions. Not seeing any. Thank you all for coming and spending some of your afternoon with the Finance Committee.
Thank you.
So now we will rotate back over to people who signed up in a for position. So we'll call up Dr. Vasily Eliopoulos, Dr. Martin Polanco, Mr. Joshua Capel, Mr. Brandon Burns, and Dr. Jennifer Tippett. And it's a combination of folks remotely and in person. So we'll start with the witness at the table. Sir, if you will introduce yourself and who you represent, we'll start your clock.
Thank you, Chair. Okay.
It's on there's a little gray button where it plugs into the table.
There we go. Yeah. Technical difficulties. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members. My name is Joshua Capel. I'm one of the founding partners of the Denver law firm Vicente, and through that role, I'm a senior advisor to the Healing Advocacy Fund. And I was also one of the lead drafters of Prop 122 and chaired the campaign issue committee. And first, I just want to thank everyone who's put in countless hours working on this bill. It's a ton of thought and effort has gone into this by the heads of regulatory agencies, the bill sponsors, the governor's office, and I think we're in a really good spot. I think they've done really well to honor the intent of Prop 122. There's a lot of issues. Not a lot, but most of the issues we really nailed it, and I think we're here today in support of this bill, and I think there is a lot of issues that you've heard that are still unaddressed. But I think what this bill does is lay the foundation to really address these issues in future sessions, and this isn't going to be a one-time. This bill is the end of it. This is a work in progress, and as it should be. And as we saw with cannabis, and as we see with a lot of new areas of law, it's really. It's going to take some time, and I think the Indigenous Working Group Committee is a step in the right direction in terms of really, getting those voices heard, and a lot of the extra focus on the regulatory side around safety is very key as well. And so I just want to, thank you guys for all your time, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. If you can stand by, we'll hear some more witnesses and open it up for questions. So, remotely, Dr. Vasily Iliopoulos?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. If you can introduce yourself, we'll start your clock for testimony. Thank you.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair and committee, thank you very much for hearing my testimony. I'm Dr. Vasily Iliopoulos. I'm a medical doctor, received my medical doctorate at Cornell University. I did my training here in Colorado with an internship in general surgery at the University Health Science Center when it was in Denver, and then residency in emergency medicine at Denver Health Medical Center. I'm board certified in emergency medicine. I spent years in the trenches, including years at St. Anthony's Hospital, which is level 1 trauma and stroke center. And I'm now in private practice in Boulder. I'm here representing myself. I am in support of this bill. I'm a physician who has extensive clinical experience with psychedelic medicine, using ketamine in our clinic, and now legally with psilocybin directly with patients in microdoses. I feel that this bill is a good opportunity to provide safe, regulated use of natural medicines to millions of people who could benefit from them under the direct supervision of trained, appropriate professionals. I have a client who just serendipitously texted me today. There's a person who's had individually three microdoses of psilocybin under my direct care. This is somebody who suffered with PTSD for years. It has affected his ability to work, his relationship with his family and children. And very briefly, I'd just like to share a couple of his words that I've paired from a text he sent me this morning. I feel good, not blissed out or anything like that, but there was a complete absence of negativity. Among other things, I noticed that I felt like myself. That may not make sense, but I felt more like myself than I have in a very long time. Again, I reiterate the fact that I think no medicine is perfect for everybody, shouldn't be put in the water, but safe, regulated use, I think, is something that will benefit millions of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Next, we would like to hear from Dr. Martin Polanco. Doctor, if you're online, if you'll introduce yourself, and we'll start your clock. He's not online. Okay. Then we'll move right down to Brandon Burns. Okay.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee,
yes.
Thank you so much for your time and dedication toward implementing this historical piece of legislation on behalf of Colorado voters. My name is Brandon Burns, and I'm the CEO of Peaks Recovery Centers, a substance use disorder and mental health disorder treatment facility here in Colorado Springs. Plant-based medicines serve as an innovative tool for the behavioral health care industry that, as an industry, has lacked innovation for quite some time while running thin on its capacity to, for example, shift the direction of the overdose epidemic we face in Colorado today, not to mention the ongoing toll of distress perpetuated by society, social media, and day-to-day hardships that continue to weigh heavily on Colorado's family systems, our military members and veterans, and culturally across America. We take great responsibility in the future delivery of these medicines and see this opportunity as a profound, innovative intervention that can, among other things, support individuals better navigate their personal hardships, such as trauma, in a more effective manner than the historical delivery of monotherapeutic approaches such as cognitive behavioral therapy or SSRIs or SNRI medications in the treatment of depression, for example. I am equally enthusiastic about the community-wide opportunity to expand access through its community members in a post-prohibition era. When managed care began paying for behavioral health care services in the early 70s, there was a strong debate about whether or not the paraprofessional or the non-credentialed clinical person was better suited to treat addiction through their lived and shared experiences of addiction, or whether or not the certified master-level clinician, for example, would best serve this person. Between treatment programs like ours and the community-based rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, that debate lives on today. Both treatment and Alcoholics Anonymous works. One approach is not more correct, but to be clear, both treatment centers and community-based approaches such as AA work in the treating of addiction and associated behaviors. The paraprofessional in this regard, to be consistent with old language, does have a profound impact on not only supporting individuals with addiction, but can also go as far as moving the addicted person's biomedical condition of craving into remission. So much of wellness is, in fact, about community and connection. Thank you again for your time, your historical work on this bill, and for allowing me to advocate for the bill in front of you today.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. And before we hear from Dr. Tippett, I want to call up Mr. Jeremy Deagle. He's the only other person who's signed up in a 4 position. So with that, we'll turn it over and ask Dr. Tippett to introduce herself and begin her testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. And to dovetail off of what Brandon just said, actually one of the founders of AA credits LSD with his recovery. So important to note. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to share my testimony with you today. My name is Dr. Jennifer Tippett. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm in support of this bill. I currently work in both research and practice of psychedelic medicine and have seen firsthand the life-changing impact. But prior to my current position, I worked as a forensic psychologist across the jails and community mental health centers of Colorado and served as the director of the substance use disorder specialty at the University of Denver. I've seen firsthand how the lack of innovation and advancement in the mental health field impacts our communities, especially those who have been previously incarcerated. There are thousands of Coloradoans left without other options when already available treatments fail or when systems are overly burdened and can't meet the demand. The excellent research done by institutions like Johns Hopkins, Imperial College, NYU, as well as life sciences and drug development companies suggests psychedelics may be an innovation and an important one. Research has widely demonstrated safety, although I acknowledge there is a need for professionals to be closely involved in the treatment process. I'm happy that Prop 122 has allowed for an opportunity for these substances to provide help to those who are in need. We know that one of the key ingredients to preventing tragedy is education and information, and Prop 122 allows for expansion of knowledge about psychedelics and how it might change the mental health landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll call one time for Mr. Jeremy Deagle. It says D-I-E-G-L. Okay, great. If you'll come up and introduce yourself. You did sign up. I had you as remote, but actually you're in person. My apologies. Great, thank you. There we go.
So thank you for having me here. My name is Jeremy Deal. I'm here representing myself. I've been using psychedelics for a few years now, and I have experienced head tremors bad from the age of 15 all the way to age 24. I had a incident where I was smacked in the face with a baseball bat. I got scars on my forehead here. So with about a year into it, I was taking about 3.5 grams and my shakes stopped. I don't look like I'm crazy or I have a mental illness. I'm pretty normal. I work a normal job. I'm an order selector. I lift weights. I'm a very healthy person. I have never experienced any feeling of overdosing. You can't overdose. There is a such thing as a tolerance. If you take 3.5, the next day you can't take 3.5 grams. You just can't. You would need to take a double amount to do that, and most people don't want to do that. So with the depression and even physical symptoms of shaking, it's very beneficial. And I would recommend the trip sitter if you're not in a mental headspace to handle these things, because you can look within yourself and you can help yourself if you want to change. But if you don't want to change, then you're not going to change. But this is all about personal wellness, spirituality, and living a better life with no mental health issues. That is all.
Thank you. So that's this panel. So committee, do we have any questions for any of these panel witnesses? I do have a question for Dr. Iliopoulos. If I heard you correctly, you used what I think is a leading term for the word of the year in 2023, microdosing. But I'm curious, you say you deploy microdosing with some of your patients. And briefly, if you could tell me, how do you discern what dosages to start with? How is that delivered? And how do you, I guess I'm trying to understand more about the actual dosing and how it's used in a clinical medicinal setting.
Yeah. Well, I guess I would argue that I don't see a difference between psychedelics and other medications. Everybody responds differently to every medicine. You know, one person, a medicine could cause an anaphylactic reaction, which could put them at risk for death, and another person can tolerate much higher doses without any issue. And so this is why I feel that having a trained professional who understands these medicines and who understands the patient in particular to help guide them in the proper use and safe use of these medicines is critical. No medicine, in my opinion, is safe for everybody, and that includes natural medicines. And so you need somebody who understands that to be able to wield these medicines safely and effectively, in my opinion. And so does that answer your question enough? I know I didn't answer it directly in terms of how I titrate dose, but I guess to say it's individual.
Okay, yeah, so that helps a lot. Thank you, sir. Committee, do we have any other questions for these witnesses? I'm sorry, did somebody else want to respond to that question? Okay. Committee, any questions? Doesn't appear to be any. Thank you all very much for giving us some of your afternoon and coming in and testifying. So those are all the witnesses we have signed up for in a for or against position. All the remaining witnesses on the list are in an amend or a neutral position, or even questions only. So is there anybody that wishes to testify for or against but didn't get an opportunity to sign up here in the room? If you want to, okay. I'm sorry? You're on the list already? If you're on the list, then you'll get called. I was just thinking if there hadn't been somebody who hadn't signed up yet. Okay, well, if you signed up, we'll get to you. And if we don't, we'll make sure we get you up here. All right, thank you. So we'll go back to our list. And in the men position, we have Mrs. Ashley Troxel and Kai Crimson, Mr. Michael Prado, Mr. Jimmy Schmers, and Dr. Angela Beers. Give folks a chance to get seated here. And since you were first to the table, perhaps you would like to start us off and introduce yourself, and we'll start your clock.
Sure.
There you go.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. My name is Ashley Ryan Troxel. I'm representing myself, and I'm here to support amendments to Senate Bill 23-290 because as written, it violates the spirit of Prop 122, harms Coloradans, and infringes on our First Amendment rights. I'm a psychedelic educator, coach, and guide with a Master's of Science in Teaching and Learning from Colorado State University. I help people in my community safely and effectively use psilocybin mushrooms. I used to teach English in local public schools, but quit due to stress and chronic illness. Psilocybin psilocybin mushrooms help me heal and find my calling. During the Senate Finance Committee hearing, Senate President Steve Fenberg says, "My bill does not make anything illegal that is not allowed by Prop 122. That was false. The amendments proposed by Senator Steve Fenberg are not adequate. They criminalize community healing. We have qualified Coloradans who are legally facilitating healing with these natural medicines. Many of them are practicing therapists and medical professionals who will not go on record for fear of losing their licenses. Current law explicitly states that providers of bona fide therapy, harm reduction, and other support services may maintain a professional website. It only prohibits paid advertising. Senate Bill 23290 bans any advertising of harm reduction services that receive remuneration. As written, this bill is unconstitutional and harmful to the public interest. The Supreme Court has held that commercial speech is protected by the First Amendment unless it is false, deceptive, misleading, related to illegal activity, or an inherent risk to public health or safety. None of these exceptions apply to advertising of harm reduction services. My advertising, which would include my personal website and social media, is truthful, accurate, and informative. I do not promote or facilitate any illegal activity, but rather aim to reduce harms associated with psilocybin usage. This bill has unintended consequences that harm public interest. By prohibiting all forms of advertising of harm reduction services, this bill prevents the public from accessing information. This would expose them to unnecessary risks and harms. It would also make me a criminal. Do you want to hear more tragic horror stories about preventable deaths, or do you believe education and harm reduction serve a valuable social function? I urge you to strike language pertaining to personal use from Senate Bill 23290. As written, it is unconstitutional and detrimental to the public interest. Thank you for your time and consideration today. Please let me know what questions I can answer.
Thank you. If you'll stand by, we'll hear from other witnesses. Kai Crimson.
Aloha, House Finance Committee members. My name is Kai Crimson. I am lobbying for myself. I am reaching out to connect with you and expressing the suppressed concerns on SB 23290. In all transparency, I want to protect the future of sacred earth medicine for generations to come in this holistic modality of healing, because as a 100% disabled veteran from the armed forces being diagnosed with PTSD from military sexual trauma, I am sober from pharmaceuticals and medical marijuana, and feeling as whole and grounded as my PTSD has subsided and the negative thought patternings from my psychological, emotional, abusive marriage has transcended, giving thanks to the rewiring of neurological pathways. My ask today is to leave SB 290 intact. Any legislation attempting to modify, limit, or remove personal usage of natural medicine is a direct violation of our rights and what we voted on, as well as my rights under the ADA, and dishonoring my service to the USA. SB 290, without consulting with sovereign indigenous tribal nations of Colorado, this is impeding on religious, spiritual, and indigenous freedoms, traditions, and ceremonial usages, ultimately recriminalizing ceremonial practices. It is crucial to address language so community protection is added back, as we need to preserve indigenous medicine keepers, stewards, and tribes with building right relationship and reciprocity with them, not tokenizing their wisdom and teaching that's been a rite of passage and way of life in their lineage for multi-generations, long before this country existed as the USA. We need to create a community task force, including voices of indigenous nations and all of our insights and guidance to co-create a more intentional bill that's inclusive and equitable, especially for BIPOC communities that are most vulnerable. Thank you for upholding your integrity and your valuable time.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Michael Prado.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee members, and thank you for everyone testifying today. I initially signed up as an amendment, but I would like to call for a strike below for this bill as it is currently written. I think that, as we've heard today, there are a lot of complexities. There's a lot of people needing representation in this bill, and I don't think that it has been given the adequate time to do that. This bill was largely modeled after the cannabis regulations, and I understand that why that was done, to delegate to appropriate state agencies. However, there's a number of things that I think should be addressed within this bill, and it really just needs more time to get this right for everyone that we've already heard from today. In the sake of time, I don't want to repeat all those interests that we've already heard. There are a couple of concerns that I have. I was really hoping to speak to my representative today directly, Alex Valdez. I've been trying to contact him over the last couple weeks since this bill came out in such a short period of time. However, I will move forward. One of the things that I've brought up with my representative is the need for Coloradans to be able to allow to use these things in public spaces. That's one thing that is specifically outlined in Prop 122 that doesn't allow for consumption of these plant medicines within public spaces. And I understand on like a psychoactive level why we wouldn't want that. However, for people who use this as a microdose or for mental health issues or for cluster headaches, we really want Coloradans to have that right to be able to consume these in public spaces on a microdose level, and also without fear of being retaliated by their employers. I'd also like to see language in there for Coloradans, how to be able to ethically source these plant medicines. There needs to be language that allows people to receive spores, clones of these plant medicines. And I would just like to end with, I would like to see there being a removal of felony drug charges from going through this vetting process that's outlined in this bill. I think that this would further impact disproportionately impacted communities and encourages this population to continue to operate in gray and black markets. And with that, my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prado. Mr. Jimmy Smers? Thank you.
Distinguished Chairperson and member of the Colorado House Finance Committee. My name is Jimmy Smers, and I am a 25-year resident of the city of Denver. On 424, Senate President Fenberg added an amendment that attempted to allow for community healing with psilocybin to exist in Colorado. He did leave out one crucial word, and that was the word paid before advertising. The legal definition of advertising is expansive. Essentially, it's any practice of attracting public notice or attention. This omission creates several issues. One, it prevents anyone seeking harm reduction services that are currently legal from being able to find them. Psilocybin is incredibly safe, but having someone knowledgeable about holding space goes a long way for those wishing to heal. Removing all advertising would not allow the citizens of Colorado to find these people. Two, it creates criminals of anyone who would post anything about harm reduction and receive remuneration. Even by telling this group of people, I offer harm reduction of psilocybin, and you can give me lunch for doing it.
Sir, if you'll keep your comments directed to the committee, it would be much appreciated.
I apologize, Travis. Even that would result in a $1,000 fine. Number three, it violates the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution by discriminating against psychedelic churches and the 1977 U.S. Supreme Court case of Bates versus the State Bar of Arizona, which allows for the advertising of legal services. I am advocating for the amendment to replace Senator Fenberg's amendment with Section 8 of Proposition 122 as the voters voted for it. Institute the will of the voters and fix the problems that may arise next legislative session. At the minimum, I am asking for the word paid to be reinserted before advertising and allow websites as Proposition 122 states to be maintained. It will help keep Colorado safe, not create criminals of people who offer harm reduction services, and keep this implementation from violating the First Amendment of the Constitution. I appreciate your time. I also, in my email, included 2 articles about what is currently happening in Oregon. I advise the committee to read that.
Great. Thank you, sir. Would you be Dr. Beers? Great. Now, if you can grab that microphone, pull it over, apologize that we, at least we have an extra chair, so.
Okay.
Please.
I did originally sign up online, so.
That's what I
have a blue eye. Okay, so my name is Dr. Angela Beers. I'm a psychologist. I am also an Indigenous community member. My paternal line is where my indigeneity comes from, and that is from Zacatecas in Coahuila, Mexico. And I also work at Naropa. I'm also trained by MAPS. I am trained, with the exception of being in the research yet, for MDMA psychotherapy assisted, psychotherapy, whatever, anyhow. And I'm also trained to rate their research. So just to give you some perspective, I've also worked in the Department of Corrections in Michigan, and I've also worked with Indigenous people in the Department of Corrections who do not receive their spiritual services. So and the reason why I mention these things is because I'm hearing some of this tokenizing of people suffering in pain. I'm also an individual who has a 30-year relationship with psilocybin. It is dangerous. It does need consultation with Indigenous tradition keepers, because a couple years, 2-month study, 6-month study is under controlled conditions. We do not know what we're letting out into the community. I'm not saying people can't heal and people shouldn't heal. What I'm saying is there's not enough protections in this, and especially for the people who stand to be marginalized and erased. I am asking for an amendment for mescaline. The reason why that is because there was no proper consultation, government to government. The sovereign nations, there's been mentions about, the 3 departments that were up here. There's the original department that's missing. And so I really feel for a lot of people who have been touched by these medicines. I have myself. That's why I have a 30-year relationship with psilocybin, and I've had other relationships with other medicines, including my own ancestral medicine, which is peyote. And we're very far from implementing this in the way that a lot of the people in this room are saying, including the scientists. And we keep talking about them as the experts. They're not the experts. We just had one who was on the second panel, my elder. These are the experts that need to be consulted, because what's at risk is the mental health, spiritual health, and physical health of the people who live in Colorado.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Beers.
Thank you.
For your testimony. So, committee, this is the current panel. Do we have any questions for any 5 of these wonderful witnesses? I'm not seeing or hearing any, so thank you all very much for coming before the Finance Committee today. We very much appreciate your testimony. So we'll keep moving right along. We'll call up Mr. Travis Fluck, Nicole Forster, Mr. Kevin Franciotti, Ms. Shauna Guheen, and Mr. Eli Katz. It looks like you're all in person. Okay. Well, we have 4 people, 4 chairs. That worked out well. So why don't we just go right down the line? Mr. Fluck, if you want to start us off, we'll begin your clock, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Travis Tyler Fluck. I am here as an individual with 29 years of experience working with psilocybin mushrooms. I led the campaign to decriminalize them here back in 2019, and since then I've been a frontline activist, educator, community builder, and end-of-life doula. In light of some of the earlier testimony today, I'm compelled to oppose this bill, citing the need for more time to address the complexities and sensitivities necessary for successful implementation. Today, my testimony is centered on reminding those within earshot that our healing can only be achieved in the container of community, local and global. The sooner that we recognize that all of the spiritual hardships, existential heartache, psychological distress, interpersonal strife, and ecosystemic genocide we experience are rooted in the illusion that we're all separate, the sooner that we can affect its tree of symptomatic influence. Let me also remind you that at one point in time in our ancestry, we all belonged to the land and each other before empire, and in my lineage's case, I'm alluding to the Roman Empire, severed this connection and inserted systems of oppression in its place. This grieved union is foreign to our conscious awareness, yet we experience the intergenerational wounds that blind us from the cause of our disease and trauma-informed decision-making. I'm saying all this here and now because, if nothing else, let it plant a seed in your awareness that there is ancestral wisdom waiting patiently to root in decolonized spaces and places within you that are devoid of true soul connection and full of outdated belief systems that no longer serve us on the path to collective liberation from self-induced suffering. These quote-unquote natural medicines are recognized by the indigenous to be master teachers, here to help humanity evolve. Ancestral medicine practices a cosmology predicated on the direct experience that all entities are interconnected and woven from the same thread. If we allow the invisible mechanics of healing in right relation, reciprocity, and interbeingness to work through us, we might stand a chance of healing ourselves, our ancestors that came before us, and the generations that lie beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fluck. Good timing. Are you Nicole Forster? Great, thank you.
Hello, my name is Nicole Forrester. I'm a resident of Boulder and a constituent of Senator Fenberg and Representative Joseph. I'm a mental health professional and an advocate for the decriminalized personal use of plant medicines. When conventional medicine could not help me, it was unregulated access to psilocybin mushrooms that cured me of cluster headaches, a severe neurological disorder. 20% of people diagnosed with the disorder attempt suicide due to the severity of symptoms, combined with the lack of a medically recognized cure. I'm part of that 20% and would not be alive today if I had not been willing to break the law, trust community healing resources, and try psilocybin at the peak of my suffering at age 18. I'm an advocate for personal use because the use of psilocybin by cluster headache and other medical patients does not fall within the scope of the healing centers designed by Prop 122 or other mental health focused models. I worked on the campaign to decriminalize psilocybin in Denver in 2019, and I've since organized efforts to decriminalize all plant medicines in Boulder and across Colorado. But last year I was an outspoken critic of Prop 122 due to widespread concern with the rushed regulatory framework and lack of adequate consultation with affected communities. I'm here today to advocate for the preservation of the personal use section as originally drafted by Prop 122 and urge that no further amendments be made to our rights to relate to these natural medicines in personal and communal settings. I would like to change my stance to oppose rather than amend. I echo those who have testified for a strike below, and I urge the same. The rush to pass this is a disrespect to the centuries of communal indigenous use, the people of Colorado, and the entire world who is watching closely to see how Colorado becomes the first to handle this unprecedented responsibility. Decriminalized Nature Boulder County organized a large turnout to Fenberg and Amable's February 13th Boulder Town Hall. We asked for information on this bill, which had not yet been drafted. We asked that it not be rushed. We asked for community outreach and drafting an adequate time to collaborate, only to find the bill introduced 2 weeks before the end of the 2023 legislative session. Colorado deserves better. Last year, I was co-proponent of Initiative 61, which was an alternative decriminalization measure that did not make the ballot. When Prop 122 was drafted, the coalition I co-led took issue with the closed Natural Medicine Advisory Board. We advocated then for an open task force, which would allow for adequate community engagement before making policy decisions. I'm asking today that this task force be created. This hearing and last week's hearing have made the necessity of this type of task force abundantly clear. Over 100 people have shown up under pressure to fit their lifetime of experience and values into 2 minutes of testimony, only to be told that we have to keep rushing forward. Please build space for us to communicate.
Thank you, Ms. Forster. Now we'll hear from Mr. Kevin Franciotti. Do we have Mr. Franciotti? He's signed up remotely. Do you have him online? Okay, thank you. Mr. Franciotti, are you ready to give your testimony?
Yep. Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to share my testimony with you today. My name is Kevin Franciotti. I'm representing myself. I'm a licensed addiction counselor and actually wanted to adjust my testimony to being in support of this bill, so apologies for messing up the order earlier in committee. This bill continues to see improvement throughout the process, and I applaud the efforts of President Fenberg and Representative Amabile to regularly engage with stakeholders and receive and adopt feedback. It has also been encouraging to see additional co-sponsors added. As both a personal beneficiary of natural medicines and a psychotherapist working with individuals experiencing mental health and substance-related distress, I'm proud to have called Colorado my home for the past 3 years. Over 12 years ago, I experienced personal healing from opiate addiction through treatment involving ibogaine, one of the natural medicines this bill is looking to regulate. It is now my honor to be a part of the thriving community of harm reduction and support providers that are dedicated to ensuring a successful implementation of Proposition 122. I know there are concerns about the impact this bill may have on vulnerable groups, and I am a passionate believer that punitive drug policy has done more harm than any deleterious side effects of drugs themselves. It has been my personal and professional experience that individuals approach their use of these natural medicines with the intention to better their lives or seek relief from problems insufficiently addressed by traditional treatments. Much of the testimony we've heard so far in opposition reflects the current shortcomings of prohibitionist policies reflective of the war on drugs and does not reflect the reality of what this reform bill will facilitate with respect to harm reduction resources, safety first drug education, and guardrails that protect minors. I plead with this committee to not let perfect be the enemy of the good and move this on past committee. And I'd be happy to share more about my experience if members have questions. Thank you all for your hearing my support today.
Thank you, sir. And if you can stand by, we'll hear from two more witnesses and open it up for questions. And with that, we'll ask to hear from Ms. Shauna Goheen. Ms. Goheen, if you'll introduce yourself, we'll start your clock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the House Finance Committee. My legal name is Shauna Goheen. My birth name is Tiferet Davina Hammond. My name was taken from me when I was taken from my father and mother and placed in foster care. My father is Native, and he and my mother were working with the ancestral medicine called peyote while she was pregnant with me. This is something known to be safe in Native communities. This society considered me a drug baby, and at 9 months old, I was placed with a new family and never saw my birth family again. The sacred medicine I received in the womb never harmed me, but the fear and judgment around it irrevocably altered my life, and I endured years of abuse as a result. It was dictated to me that I could not be part of my tribe, and now I ask that you not dictate how I can receive the sacrament of Indigenous people. These are ancestral medicines, and many tribes believe these medicines are their ancestors. They're most highly evolved and ancestors that came back to Earth to help humanity and took plant forms so they could be here physically in an enduring way. Unfortunately, there's a lack of awareness about the fact that we only know about psilocybin because of the Mazatec people. Their word for it is tonanatio, which means skin of God. This medicine is their way of connecting with God. The traditions around the use of these medicines goes back over 10,000 years, and the use of them has been passed down through sacred oral tradition. Over 10,000 years of safe use surpasses clinical trials. Indigenous medicine men and women should be the ones issuing the licenses. If you are experiencing fear and judgment around this, please ask yourself if this is based on your extensive knowledge of this medicine, or it is because you don't understand it and it's outside your paradigm. To understand these medicines, please listen to the tribes that have worked with them for thousands of years and ensure no Indigenous person from anywhere in the world is ever criminalized for working with them or attempting to heal others with them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your testimony.
We need some more time to
I know it's very difficult.
get all these details down.
But if you can stand by, maybe there'll be some questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Eli Katz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and other members of this committee. My name is Eli Katz, and I was originally lobbying to amend, but I'm now moving to strike below. On behalf of my fallen brothers and sisters, I'm a September 11th first responder, victim of domestic violence, and fully disabled since May 2019. In 2003, I traveled offshore, began to find healing through the use of DMT in the form of ayahuasca, as well as with mescaline mushrooms. In 2017, I founded a 501c3, Zwisky Foundation, to fight caregiver burnout and compassion fatigue. In 2020, I founded Darn Fine Farm, an agricultural co-op to provide medicine to churches, healers, and support circles for veterans and other first responders. I'm also a member of the Association of Entheogenic Practitioners, a religious professional organization, mutual aid society, uniting practitioners from many traditions who share a sincere belief in the religious nature of the entheogenic experience in order to expand safe access to such experiences. I'm one of the people who helped draft Proposition 122. I want to speak to my efforts since 2020 to advance the rights of people to use natural medicine, specifically microdosing psilocybin, in their recovery. In 2021, I was awarded Best Research Advancement at the Psychedelic Medicine Conference for my efforts to develop a mushroom microdose formulation that we call Prevail. Today, I have hundreds of testimonials from people I personally helped taper off the SSRIs, SNRIs that were hurting, not helping. Many of these testimonials are from caregivers, veterans, and first responders. In order to make this available, I have a team of medical advisors and pharmacists that work with me to define and review best practices and to hold me accountable to these standards.
Thank you, sir. If you can stand by, we have one more witness for this panel. We'll call Mr. Kevin Matthews. And do we have Mr. Matthews on remotely? Okay. Welcome, Mr. Matthews. If you can turn your camera on, please do so. Introduce yourself, and we'll start your testimony clock. We can't hear you, sir. You must still be muted.
I was muted. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Kevin Matthews. I'm a dad. I currently reside in Jefferson County, born and raised in Denver. I was the campaign manager of the Denver Psilocybin Initiative, and I'm a retired U.S. Army veteran with over a decade of experience with psilocybin. I'm representing myself today as one of the 2 designated representatives of the Natural Medicine Health Act. I'm overall fairly supportive of this bill and appreciate all the work gone into it as a critical next step for effective implementation, and look forward to sorting out the final details and the spirit and intent of the proposition. And I do have some suggestions I encourage all of you to consider today. Prop 122 was designed for people to benefit from the demonstrated healing and relief that's possible with natural medicines, and in terms of equitable access, to create more autonomy and choice for people to utilize them, which is why we included both a regulated access program and a personal use model. We've made great progress since this bill was introduced last week, and I think we're close to something that embodies the spirit and intent of the proposition. 54% of voters declared that access to natural medicines is a matter of statewide concern because we're facing a mental and behavioral health crisis in our state, which these medicines can address in a powerful way in regulated and personal use in community settings. If we're in a crisis, then our priority should be to do the best we can to ensure that those who can possibly benefit the most from these medicines have access and are protected from criminal liability. In many cases, those who may benefit the most are the most marginalized among us. Folks that face barriers to access to health care, those who've been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, and people who are struggling with disabilities, whether mental or physical, in our urban and rural communities. As a designated representative, I'm requesting no further restricting amendments to personal use, returning to the intent of Prop 122 with no fees for record sealing, allowing parolees and those on state supervision to possess natural medicines without facing additional criminal repercussions, allowing for the extraction of natural medicines because that's an accessibility issue, allowing for the cultivation of natural medicines in secured garages and auxiliary buildings on private property for personal use because that's a safety issue, especially in light of preventing access to those under 21, and most of all, that this body respects the will of the nearly 1.3 million voters who approved Prop 122 in November. Again, thank you for the opportunity and your time and consideration today.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. So that's this panel. Committee, do we have any questions for the members of this panel? I don't see any. Thank you all very much for joining us today. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Moving right along, we'll go to our next panel. We'll call up Matthew Duffy, Sean McAllister, Philip Wolf, Juliana Tedeschi, and Henry Ansbacher. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And
Matthew's gone.
Matthew's gone. Okay.
He asked if we could, if he said he'd be here at 3:30, so if you could put him on the next panel, that would be wonderful.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
I'll make a flag of that then. In lieu of that, so we called up Sean McAllister, Philip Wolf, Juliana Tedeschi, Henry Ansbacher, Madison Cartella, and Andrea Valeska Arnold. Okay. Well, I see we have some folks already seated at the table. So, Sean McAllister, would you like to start us off?
My name is Philip Wolf.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you, committee members. Very impressed with the work that's been done to date. I was a drafter of Proposition 122, also helped draft Amendment 64 back in the day. So have been working hard on drug policy for 25 years. I'm a member of the Denver Psilocybin Policy Review Panel and spent 10 years as a criminal defense lawyer standing next to people facing prison for possession or other crimes around natural medicine. So my quick points today with very little time is this same issue about advertising of traditional practitioners or non-regulated practitioners. When we drafted this proposition, focused on people could not do paid advertising. And it seems like you all have expanded the law to just say any kind of advertising that would prohibit somebody from saying in a social media post or an email to their friends that this activity is something that a harm reduction activity is something they can provide in conjunction with sharing natural medicine. So I ask you to clarify it should only be paid advertising. That's what we intended in the law. Number two, don't prohibit probationers or parolees from using natural medicines. That was actually taken out. We put that in specifically so people couldn't be criminalized while on probation or parole. You all have now taken that section out, so we ask you to put those protections back in to respect the will of the voters. I'm also concerned about this inherently hazardous substances provisions. I think that the addition of the word knowingly is good, but will still criminalize many people who are not actually endangering others. So I'd ask you to focus on conduct that actually endangers others and not inherently hazardous substances. Also concerned about the restriction to only growing in primary residences. Maybe a garage or a shed is a better location, and so that amendment should be changed. And with that, I'll end my testimony. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister. Mr. Philip Wolf.
Thank you. My name is Philip Wolf, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself today. And, I just want to acknowledge how complex this is. This is a multidimensional thing that is unfolding right now into the physical world, and that's hard for me to understand so much because I use these plant medicines very ceremonially and for my own spiritual healing. I've watched my mom die, I've watched my father die, and I've watched him go to the beyond. And as a person who was suicidal, it wasn't mental health, which was important to me. It was my spiritual health. It was what was important to me. And these plant medicines allowed me to access that spiritual health. And that is something that is so, so important to me. And I believe beyond all PTSD and everything that we're talking about with mental health, it is our spiritual health and it is our disconnection from earth. It's our disconnection from this land. And so I don't know how you get this bill right. I don't think anyone knows how you get this bill right at the end of the day. And what I do know and what is my biggest concern is the exploitation of these sacred medicines, and exploiting them is my biggest fear, because that is what's going to create improper relationship. And I urge to a lot of my community members here right now, like a lot of this is going to have to be governed by the community, so we hold up the spiritual intent of these medicines. And that is so crucial, and I urge everybody to listen to those words. And in regards to advertising, I actually think it's a good thing that we can't advertise, because that's where that's where you can have the biggest opportunity to really exploit everything that's going on. Now, is an email communication about a plant medicine ceremony advertising? In my opinion, no, and you should be able to do that. And so I have a lot of friends here who are on both sides of this, and we want to push this back another year. I honestly don't know what that is going to do, because I think these complexities are still going to be here in place. And so what I really urge right now is for an Indigenous Advisory Committee to have decision-making power that happens with what is going to unfold with DORA, whatever regulatory body it is. It's not just putting a committee together, it is giving them power to make decisions, and I think that is the most important thing that we can do to hold up the integrity of these medicines, given this Western law and this Western lens and what it's unfolding to. And so I would just really, really urge for that decision-making type of power that can allow still for the spiritual use of this plant, because as a white man, I can't ignore how much my ancestors have exploited from the earth. And so I just want to make sure that that does not happen in this crucial time in our world right now.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Appreciate your testimony, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Tedeschi.
Hi, my name is Juliana Tedeschi. I appreciate your time today, everyone on the committee who has sat here and heard all of this testimony. I think everyone who's speaking today has a very important perspective to add to something that I agree is extraordinarily complex. I am representing myself today as a concerned citizen. I am a third-year law student at Denver Law, and I have studied this bill in a personal and educational capacity over the course of my final year. I am concerned that the current version of the draft has a glaring omission when it comes to one of our most vulnerable populations deserving access. And I'm speaking specifically about access for people on parole and probation, as Proposition 122 was approved with a provision that would have allowed them access without any further criminal penalties. Just a couple quick statistics. 44% of those incarcerated nationally are diagnosed with some sort of mental disorder. This compares almost twice as much as people in the general population. Women on probation and parole are twice as likely as women in the general population to experience mental illness. And as someone who has also had the very unique experience of working with an underground psychedelic therapist to work on my own complex trauma, I sit here today telling you that these medicines are extremely powerful. I use psilocybin in an extremely powerful and life-changing way that has allowed me to come here today and tell you about this in a way that is both informed from a legal perspective and an anecdotal perspective, and everyone should have access. And if we're talking about rehabilitation for one of our most vulnerable populations, they should be afforded the opportunity to heal and lead healthy and productive lives like myself and like everyone else in this room today. And we don't afford people who have been implicated with the criminal justice system enough of a voice. So my ask, I support with amendments to add the language back from Prop 122 that allows people on parole and probation to access these medicines. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Henry Ansbacher. Hi. So if it's green, you're good to go.
Excellent. My name is Henry Ansbacher. I'm speaking on my own behalf today. I'm a mental health professional and filmmaker. To me, the potential of these medicines are really kind of transformative, and I think it's important that I'm in support of this bill with a strong personal use component and a strong community-based harm reduction component. I think if we limit those, we're going to leave the medicine in the hands of like the medical community or the pharmaceutical community, and I don't think that those necessarily are the best ways to serve the community. In my experience, our communities right now are suffering from a lot of deaths of despair and a lot of isolation. And the value of a community coming together using this medicine to provide real healing is really powerful. And I think to leave it in somehow, and to put it in the same category as the marijuana business, or even other intoxicants like alcohol. It's a very different substance, and it has a profound healing potential. And I think it's important to have a strong carve out for personal use and community-based services. So that's my thought.
Thank you, sir. If you guys can stand by, we'll hear from a couple more witnesses and open it up for questions. So Ms. Madison Cartaya. Cartaya, thank you. Please.
My name is Madison Cartaya. I represent myself and echo many before me in asking for time on SB 290 through a strike below. Peace never hurries. To rush or force is contradictory to the essence of peace, and peace is the essence of Prop 122 through easing the mental health crisis that ties back to so many other hot topics in politics, from homelessness to the opioid crisis to gun control. Many testified about the intent of Prop 122 and whether constituents knew what they voted for. Irrefutably, the focus of its short description on the ballot was a chance at starting to heal. Accessible, equitable access to a promising tool. Obviously, there's a lot of politics that goes into something like this, and I'm empathetic to the hard work that has gone into ensuring the federal government will be willing to uphold the rights we voted for and protecting our community from possible harms. SB 290 needs more time and work to do this well. This is a huge move the state is making, and the rest of the country will be looking to us for whether this works and how to adapt their own policies going forward. We have the opportunity of not being the first state to attempt this, but the second. We aren't first-gen technology working out the bugs, but the second-gen getting to learn from the mistakes of our predecessor and attempt to build a better model. Are we taking the time to do that? This 87-page bill was released less than 2 weeks ago, and we are already at our third hearing. At the first hearing, we had an amendment about a typo. After 4 hours of testimony, the process of bringing up amendments and voting on the bill took less than 20 minutes, with nearly half the votes from senators who didn't even stay in the room for a quarter of the testimonies. Take time today to entertain the strike below proposed by the poly advocacy Melanie Rose Rogers represents, which begins to address concerns Jess, Nicole, and others eloquently put regarding the timing of the inclusion of an educated, Indigenous inclusive regulatory task force and the threat to First Amendment's rights expressed by Ashley Troxel and others. Give time to consult with experts, the tribes who have spoken out with concerns, the counties scared about what these regulations would actually look like, the parents concerned for the lives of their children. Let's do this right, or at least do our best. I hope to hear the proposed strike below considered and addressed when you all are asked about amendments at the end of this hearing. Thank you, representatives.
Thank you. And our final witness for this panel, Mrs. Andrea Valeska Arnold. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's how.
That's fine, man.
And the members of the committee. It is a little bit nerve-wracking to be here, speaking for plant medicine. I'm an Indigenous woman. I come from the south of the Americas. I'm a Mapuche. My lineage is a Mapuche, which is from the south of Chile and Argentina. It's nerve-wracking to speak for, I'm representing myself, but I would like to speak for this medicine because this medicine for Indigenous people aren't just medicine to heal. These are master's medicines. These are master plants, master tissues that they have been used in the Indigenous community for thousands of years. And I would like to say that many of the people who are testimonying today who were pro Proposition 122 did never consult Indigenous people. I was one of them asking for them to slow down and to consult Indigenous people. We need to be aware that these plant medicines don't grow in Colorado, and there is a reason for that. And the Proposition 122, what it wants to do is to create cultivation in this land. I had the opportunity when I moved to Colorado at the end of 2017 to meet many Indigenous people from the tribes that where this land is from. They are from this land, that they were pushed away from this land, and none of them were consulted. The bill that Senator Fenberger is proposing, it was the first time that we actually were heard and that we are asked for our feedback. So I'm here in approval of this bill with amendments, that the step that the senator is doing with putting a group of Indigenous people advising the advisory board that Proposition 122 put on that proposition, it is the first step on the right direction, because as you have heard today, many people speak about their healing path. Many people speak about their spiritual path. Many people speak about how they want to make money out of this medicine as well. And nobody is really speaking about why are we not asking those who these medicines were given to. These medicines were given to the Indigenous people for a reason. They were not given to pharmaceuticals. They were not given to individuals. It was given to Indigenous people, to medicine men, medicine women, for a reason. So what I'm asking today is for you to please open your heart and your mind to the understanding that this is beyond any of us. It's way bigger than any of us, and that you listen to what the Indigenous people press release is asking. We are asking to remove peyote out of Proposition 122. We understand that the vote already passed and that we need to respect that, but this bill is actually moving in the right direction to respect the Indigenous way. Thank you very much. I know I went over time.
That's okay. Thank you. So that's the last witness for this panel. Committee, do we have any questions for these wonderful folks who have spent the afternoon with us? I don't see any. Thank you all very much for waiting it out and testifying.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, look, we might have just one panel left. We had a few people that we called earlier that weren't available, so we'll circle back to them. But now we'd like to call up Dana Tuscania Starbird and Mr. Jared Petchke, Ali Daly, and then we have an Ellen Giratana for questions only. And then circling back, does Mr. Matthew Daly made it into the chamber in here today? Are you Mr. Sorry, I crossed the line through there, and I couldn't read my own cross out. Thank you. And then I understand that Corey Gaines may be remotely available. Great. We can get those folks remotely up. Is Miss Starbird? Yes. Yes. Why don't you start us off, please? Introduce yourself, and we'll love to hear your testimony.
Thank you, committee members.
Yeah.
Thank you, committee members, for hearing my testimony. My name is Dana Tusconia Starbird. I am Tuslagi from my paternal side. I am here to speak about the spirituality of this medicine. It has helped heal me, and I've had a relationship to these medicines for over 23 years. My son is a vet. He is suicidal right now. They have put him on many different pharmaceuticals, which has caused him to be even more suicidal. He wants to microdose. This will help him. And I ask that that be allowed for our veterans and not have to be disclosed. I'm very concerned about the data collection. Who's going to have control of that? Is it going to be pharmaceutical people? I'm very concerned about $3,500 for a practitioner license. That makes it out of my scope of not even being able to afford that, when a doctor's license is only $1,600. I'm sorry. I'm also concerned about the age limit and the lens in which the Western people see this medicine from. In indigenous cultures, children are brought up and they are taught to respect our ancestors. They are taught that this is medicine to help them. So education is vital and is very important, as well as harm reduction. I'm a doctoral student in natural medicine and integrative medicine. I have also have a master's in clinical counseling and art therapy, and I'm a licensed body worker. I helped with transcribing the studies at NYU on end-of-life studies with psilocybin, and I helped transcribe the studies from University of New Mexico on alcohol cessation. And I've been a MAPS sub-investigator for 2 years.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We've gone a little over, so we're going to move on. But if you could stand by for questions, that would be very much appreciated. Mr. Jared Petchke.
Thank you, distinguished members. Yeah, as you guys have heard, it's a very, 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 very complex issue. I'm obviously here today doing a documentary. I've been doing this for about 2.5 years. My passion for doing this, started with working in the legislature, so I understand how all this kind of works. And I have to genuinely say that your guys' job is not easy right now. The voters of Colorado, spoke pretty, with 54% on what they wanted to do. I have a lot of opinions. But as a documentary filmmaker, it's probably not my place to do that just right now. But I implore you guys, and I really just want to thank you guys for your work on this and trying to, make the best of it. It's not really an easy thing because there's a lot of people with a lot of very passionate ways about trying to make this go one way or the other. And I guess I would just say, thank you for taking the time to listen and really, do your best to listen to these and be touched in whatever way. And just thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Allie Daly. Do we have Allie Daly remotely? Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Allie Daly, and I'm the Senior Behavioral Health Policy Coordinator at Children's Hospital Colorado, testifying in a neutral position on Senate Bill 290. We are grateful to Representative Amabile for her leadership on this issue, and we are so appreciative of her efforts to support the safety and mental health of Colorado's children and youth. Children's Hospital Colorado did not take a position on Proposition 122. This is similar to our approach in 2012 with Amendment 64 and the legalization of marijuana. We did not take a position on that amendment, but in the past decade, we have closely monitored and participated in the implementation process of legalization to ensure that research continues to examine the safety of products and that children and youth are not accessing marijuana. We will take a similar approach regarding psychedelic substances and look forward to continuing conversations with the sponsors and bill proponents in the coming years to ensure that as Colorado continues to be a leader in the legalization of new products, Colorado also remains a leader in research and the regulations necessary to ensure that children and youth are not getting access to these products, and that we continue to monitor any adverse health impacts. This will require close partnerships with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment and coordination with their existing substance use prevention and education programs. The state should also look at tracking the type and strength of psychedelics being used and making that data available for research and public health surveillance so that we can continue to learn about impacts on physical and mental health. The work is just beginning, and Senate Bill 290 is only a first step. Thank you to the bill sponsors and this committee for the opportunity to testify today. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Daly. Now we're going to circle back and include, we have Mr. Duffy here with us. So, Mr. Duffy, if you want to introduce yourself,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hear you.
My name is Matthew Duffy. Thank you all for being here and listening to all of us today. I'm co-founder and co-executive director of the Society for Psychedelic Outreach Reform and Education, SPORE. I've sent, I think everyone here, I believe, unless I missed someone in the email, recommendations for today for the ongoing process with the rest of this bill. So I don't feel the need to reiterate any points specifically. I just want to say that when we're saying that we just want to maintain communal protections, what we're saying is that we want to make sure that community itself is decriminalized. We're asking for the support of legislators to be able to have more space and time to work with you all for all of our shared concerns. We're asking for the ability without legal threat to take care of each other, to be able to take care of each other, to be able to make sure that medicine is being responsibly stewarded and people are getting the help that they need in community. And we have so much to figure out together. And sincerely, why so many of us are showing up is because we want to build these relationships with legislators, and we want to make sure that we do this right, because what happens here in Colorado will set the precedent for the rest of this country. And it's vital that we take our time and not make any sweeping changes. So with what we submitted today, with our recommendations, there were some things to address, to remediate that are specifically for allowing community to do what it needs to do, allowing us to take care of each other. And we need each other. We need these bridges to be built. And so we're here for the long road ahead. And just, please hear us out and give the community here that deeply, deeply cares about this and has the knowledge and wisdom to be able to take care of each other and steward medicine in their communities, the ability to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Okay, and now if I understand correctly, Corey Gaines is available remotely? Yeah, so we'll hear from Mr. Corey Gaines, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate you letting me back in. With my teaching schedule, sometimes it's difficult to get the timings right to come down and testify. My name is Corey Gaines. I'm a resident of Logan County. I had signed up in opposition, although I suppose I could be better categorized perhaps under amend. And forgive me if this has already been put forward. I may have missed it. But my concern with this bill is the lack of local control as I saw it written on the internet when I last checked. I don't oppose anything else in it. But I sent an email to both the sponsors and the committee and included a map in there which showed all the areas of Colorado which voted no on Proposition 122. And it's quite a few people. And as I understand it, the bill's language which says a local jurisdiction is prohibited from adopting, enacting, or enforcing a conflicting law means that there will be no local regulation. And that's a big concern to me. I find it concerning with regard to zoning, and I find it concerning here. Whatever the reason, whatever the sound bites, don't let all the rest of this stuff blind you to the fact that this is going to be, if I understand it correctly, an intrusion on local control and get seen by such. People out in Logan County are very different than the sponsors, which both come from Boulder. And it's okay for us to differ in our views, but we should be able to make things look like we want them where we live instead of the people of Boulder telling the people in Logan what to do. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines. So, folks, we only have one other witness signed up to testify, and Mr. Jay Fisher is actually signed up. I'm sorry, wrong name. Ms. Ellen Giaratana from the Colorado Center of Law and Policy is signed up for questions only. So do we have her remotely available for questions, or we do not? So this is our last panel. There may be some other folks, and we'll capture them in a minute if they're still there. But questions for this panel committee? Anybody on either side of me? Apparently not. So thank you all very much. Your testimony is very much appreciated. I know I heard you, both of you, all of you. So thank you again. Well, folks, that's the end of our signed up witness list. Is there anybody in the room that wishes to testify on Senate Bill 290 but didn't get an opportunity to sign up? Not seeing or hearing anyone. Do we have anybody online that we've overlooked? So if there's no more testimony, no more witnesses, we will close the witness testimony phase and bring the bill sponsor back up. And I just want to give a heartfelt thank you to all the folks that stuck with us over this long afternoon and gave your heartfelt testimony. It does matter. I know sometimes it seems you may question that, but it is important and you're very much appreciated. Representative Amable.
Thank you,
You are
Mr.
back
Chair.
with us, and I'm going to open the amendment phase and ask you, do you have any amendments on Senate Bill 290?
Indeed, I do. I would like to start with Amendment L018.
Okay, I think Ms. Shipley is just getting the amendments together, so if you'll give us a moment. I'm not sure.
Sorry, I had hoped to hand them out a little bit earlier, but there were some last-minute changes, so.
All right. Rep. Amable, are you intending to present these amendments in numerical order?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And you can pass them all out. That'd be great.
I believe that is what we are endeavoring to do. So we have so far disseminated 3.
That's it.
That's it. Okay. We have 18, 22, and 23. And okay. Does everybody have 3 amendments or close to getting them? 2, and here comes the 3rd. Okay. Rep. Amable, would you like to tell us a little bit about L018?
Yes, thank you. So we did hear several people mention protections for people who are on parole and probation. And it certainly is our intention that these medicines be no longer illegal. And that's what this amendment does, is make sure that people who are on parole or probation, that there's a process by which they can continue to use these medicines without having any adverse consequences to their legal case. And I will also say that we also do that with marijuana, and we model that off of that. And I ask for a yes vote.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move L018 to SB 290.
Second.
That's a good motion, seconded by Representative Kennedy. I'm sorry? Oh, Lindstedt. I should have looked. Kennedy's not even in the room right now.
Very powerful.
Okay, restate that. Seconded by Representative Lindstedt. Any discussion? Any questions about L018? Is there any objection to L? There's an objection. Ms. Shipley, will you poll the committee, please? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Rep. Marshall?
So just for me to confirm, this conforms to exactly the same we do for alcohol and marijuana then for people on probation?
Rep. Mobley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think we did actually specifically say in law that people who are have a medical marijuana card can use marijuana while they're on probation, as long as it wasn't a factor in their crime. And also, yeah, yes.
Rep. Marshall, do you have a follow-up? No? Okay. Anybody else? Any questions or comments? Okay, well, we have an objection, so let's poll the committee on the passage of L018.
Representatives Bockenfeld.
No.
Degree Kennedy.
Pass.
Frizzell excused. Kipp.
Yes.
Lindstedt.
Yes.
Marshall.
Yes.
Taggart. Valdez.
Yes.
Weinberg.
No.
Degree Kennedy.
Yes.
Joseph.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. That passes 8-2. L018 is adopted.
Okay.
Rep. Mobley, would you like to tell us about L022?
Yes. So L022 has to do with sealing prior offenses for use of psychedelic medicines. And we also did this with marijuana. And so a defendant who wants to have their record sealed can do that. I just will add that there haven't been a lot of convictions for use of psychedelic medications, but there have been some. And so this is a protection around that.
Thank you. I had noticed that there were single digits number of people that had been. Okay. Any comments or questions? Rep. Weinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This applies to after this bill is passed and signed by the governor. Would that still apply to anybody who's using psychedelics after the fact?
Rep. Mobley.
You mean after this bill, this goes into effect? Yeah, would apply to them if they, yes. Let me just say the provisions under the ballot measure have already gone into effect with regard to the personal use. So they went into effect starting January 1st. So no one should be charged with that now. If you're asking if you did something that was still, after this passes fully, still illegal, no.
Okay. Rep. Joseph?
Oh, yes, Mr. Chair. I move L022 to Senate Bill 290.
Second.
That's a good motion, seconded by Representative Lindstedt. Any questions, comments on L022? Is there any objection?
Objection.
There is an objection. Ms. Shipley, would you poll the committee, please?
Representatives Bockenfeld.
No.
Degree Kennedy.
Yes.
Frizzell excused. Kipp.
Yes.
Lindstedt.
Yes.
Marshall.
Yes.
Taggart.
Yes.
Valdez.
Yes.
Weinberg.
No.
Joseph.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. That also passes 8-2. And now we have L023. Rep. Amabile, would you like to tell us about Amendment L023?
Yes, so L023 is a little bit more of a catch-all. And the first two parts of this amendment have to do with the concerns expressed by the Colorado Municipal League. And in the ballot measure, it said that cities can have some control over the manner and location and timing. And this is not everything that CML asked for, not by a long stretch actually, but because we wanted to keep the fidelity of the ballot measure intact. But this is one of the things that they asked for, which was to have some extra clarity around what is an entity and what is a facility. And so this is the language that they asked for, and it just says a facility where an entity is, because an entity could be a person. And then when you go to get a license to become a licensed practitioner, it is common practice in Colorado that you provide fingerprints, and so that puts that into this. And then this was, so there's the regulated marketplace where people are going to, or regulated part where people are going to be able to provide services, get a license to do that, and set up a healing center, which is also licensed. In the unlicensed or the unregulated part of the ballot measure, you can still provide these products, give them to somebody, and then you can get paid to facilitate them using them. And so we wanted this to just say, if you're not licensed, you have to tell the person that you're not licensed, because they are paying you and they might make the assumption that you are licensed. And this same wording is in the part of the bill that talks about ceremonies. They are also required to tell you that they are not a licensed provider. So it just mirrors that language. And then in the ballot measure, it says that your use of natural medicines alone is not a reason for you to be deemed an unfit parent and have your children taken from you. And that is in the ballot measure. And it is also in law in Colorado that merely using substances is not a reason to be involved in the child welfare system. And this just clarifies that, because it was repetitive between the bill and what's already in law. And so we put in this language to clarify that. And that was at the request of various child welfare groups, counties.
Okay, any, Rep. Weinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to hear this out the right way from what I think I'm hearing. If me and my wife have an infant, newborn baby, and we are both on psychedelic drugs while we have an infant child, we're exempt. Is that what I'm hearing?
Rep. Amabile?
Yes, thank you. That's a good clarifying question. Currently, if you and your wife have an infant child and you're having a glass of wine or some beers or smoking a joint, that is not a reason why somebody could come and take your kids away from you. And so this just provides that same protection for people who are using psychedelic medicines or natural medicines.
Rep. Weinberg.
Thank you for that answer. So again, just to hear it, if I'm on a psychedelic and I have a new infant child, I'm exempt.
Rep. Amabile.
That is correct, unless you were, somehow otherwise harming your child, then you wouldn't be. But if you're just sitting around in your own home, minding your own business, yeah.
Committee, any other comments, questions? Vice Chair Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question. I have two questions. The first question is about the manner, time, and place regulation. You mentioned how Amendment 23 offers some of the changes that were requested by CML. Do you know if this amendment bring them to either neutral or to support the bill at this time?
Rep. Mobley.
I don't know where they are officially. This was not everything they wanted, but it was something that they wanted. And I guess when I give you my closing comments, I can give you a more fulsome answer, but the ballot measure was very specific that these healing centers can operate without, you cannot bar them from your local area. So we could not do that in the bill.
Sorry, Vice Chair Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just need some clarification. You mentioned on page 81, I don't have the bill in front of me, and I remember we talked about this particular section about the ceremonies. On Amendment L23, pages 25 to 28, you mentioned facilitators. Their obligation, I understand their obligation in that section when we talk about ceremonies, it says that they have an obligation to notify. But it also, now I see that again, and I'm wondering, are there other categories of facilitators in the bill that also are required to notify?
Rep. Mobley.
Yes, so there's two places in the bill where somebody can facilitate somebody else using natural medicines. In the first place, that is in a ceremonial setting, and that's page, it's sooner in the bill, 22 or 25, I don't remember the page number. And then later in the bill, we talk about, in the unregulated section, we talk about just a person who is facilitating other people using these natural medicines. And they may ask to be reimbursed for their time, but they are giving you the medicine, or maybe you even bring it yourself, and those people have to also say that they're not licensed.
Okay.
And that also exists in law for, any number of unlicensed providers of various services, that they do have to inform you of that.
Okay. Vice Chair Joseph.
Asking me to move the bill, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
The amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment L023 to Senate Bill 290.
That's a good motion, seconded by Representative Valdez. Any further discussion? Is there any objection?
Objection.
Ms. Shipley, would you poll the committee, please?
Representatives Bockenfeld.
No.
Yes. Degree Kennedy.
Yes.
Rizal excuse. Kip.
Yes.
Lindstedt.
Yes.
Marshall.
Yes.
Taggart. Valdez.
Yes.
Weinberg.
Absolutely not.
Joseph.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. So that passes 8-2. Rep. Mobley, do you have any additional amendments?
No, I do not.
Committee, do you have any amendments to Senate Bill 290? Seeing and hearing none, the amendment phase is closed. That brings us to the wrap-up. Rep. Mobley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members. And I do want to say thank you to all the people who came and provided us with testimony. I think the takeaway from the testimony is that ballot measure 122 is controversial. It has a lot of aspects that people like, some people like. It has aspects that the people who like some parts of it don't like. It has parts that nobody likes. It has, some people like all of it. And there isn't, in this particular case, there isn't the pro side and the against side. There's a whole bunch of sides. And I think you heard that people for a lot of different reasons don't like things that are in this ballot measure and do like things that are in this ballot measure. Somebody said the people from Boulder are telling us what we have to do. But that's really not true, because this was voted on by the entire state of Colorado. And the voters spoke, and the voters passed ballot measure 122. And now it is our job as the legislature to implement the will of the voters. And I think it's no secret that I am a mental health advocate. And so if there are some things in here that are going to be good for people with serious mental illness that will help them, I want that. But also, I am concerned about some of the provisions in the ballot measure, because I think they are opening up some avenues for use that could potentially be problematic. But we don't know that. And also, I don't get to decide what we do. The voters already decided what we are going to do. And so our bill is about trusting the voters to have said what they want, and of implementing this measure in a way that has fidelity to the will of the voters, while also giving us a framework that we can legally and administratively execute on. And we actually have to do this. We have to. We don't really have a choice. And I understand that a lot of people who didn't want the ballot measure also don't want the bill. But it's really not an option. And any of us might someday get a ballot measure passed that almost half the people don't like, and we would still want that policy to be implemented because that's what the voters said they wanted. And I believe in that. I believe that in our state, when we pass a ballot measure, we passed a ballot measure. It won. And now we have to implement it. And we are trying to implement this in a safe and efficient way. And I ask you to please vote yes.
Rep. Weinberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I hear what you're saying. I hear what your intent is. I hear the having to pass. I don't agree with the no option stuff, especially when amendments come along. And the reason I don't agree with it is because what the voters voted for and what we amended today was not what the voters knew. We've added now onto this bill. Not really. That's what the amendments have done. It was not in the original intent of what voters knew. And that, to me, is a big concern. You know, we're talking earlier about 0 incidents or double-digit incidents that are happening where people are getting in trouble for this type of stuff. The reason that that doesn't occur is because they are doing it responsibly behind closed doors, and nobody knows it's happening. Now you're asking the bloody government to get involved. And that is only going to create incident. I don't understand it, man. The original intent has been altered from what the voters have put in place. And I would put forth, very much so, that now that you're going to involve firefighters, nurses, EMTs, and police officers, and government, that this is only going to get worse. It is not an opposition to mushrooms that I take a stand on. It's an opposition of government getting involved. That felt good, actually.
Don't encourage it.
I don't get it. We didn't have an issue, and now we're going to create one.
Please, let's not fall apart here at the very end of this hearing. Weinberg, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really hope, from day one I've said to all of you, that what you're doing is the right thing. But this one, I firmly stand that I think there's something wrong here. Firmly stand on it. And even coming close to a yes vote to this one is literally doing the opposite of what you've said the whole time, is going against the people that have originally voted on something. This goes against that because it's been amended and amended and amended and amended. It was not a ballot measure as it's come into this bloody room. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any additional closing comments? Vice Chair Joseph. Sorry. Representative Bachenfeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also going to be a no vote. And I'm a no vote for a little bit of a different reason. Yes, the citizens did pass it, but they expect us to responsibly implement this program. You already have too much testimony here that's where there's loose ends, CML, the indigenous populations. This isn't ready for prime time. There's no reason to rush it. We can take our time. We can get it right. And for those reasons, I'm going to be a no vote.
Taggart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Mobley. I must say, having sat through all the witness testimony, I feel like I'm between a rock and a hard place. And there have been some bills that have been somewhat that way, but I don't know that I've ever felt quite this way about a single bill. And here's the reason that I feel that way. One, this goes into effect basically at the end of next year by the extension. I mean, it can be done privately, but the licensing has to be in place by the end of next year. We're 2 weeks away from the end of this session, so the next time we could work on that licensing is next year, which is not giving our staff in various departments time to do licensing correctly. And having come from, it took us almost 2 years to do the licensing in our community on marijuana, and trying to do that in a 6 or 8 month period is very difficult. So on one hand, I'm concerned if we don't approve this, we're going to be in real trouble in terms of the licensing side of this with our organizations within the state. But on the other side of things, the testimony by our indigenous families is very moving and very understandable. Even though, as unfortunately a white man, I don't know that part of their culture as much as I would like to say I do. And that particular side of things, I almost would like to see it stripped out of this bill with a completely separate bill on how does this interface, this law interface with indigenous people. And I don't think it's, I don't, that's why I feel like I'm between a rock and a hard place, because I don't even know how to tell you folks as sponsors how to do that. I just don't have a clue. I think the amendments as it relates to local control, I think those can be solved in amendments coming forward and moving forward. And that probably seems odd because I'm one of the biggest proponents of local control, but I'm convinced we can do that. but I'm really scared to death of this situation of how do we interface well and interact well with the people that founded this country and this continent and the southern continent. And I don't have a good answer. And that's why I really feel like I'm between a rock and a hard place on this.
Vice Chair Joseph?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's so interesting. I feel the same as a lot of our colleagues based on what I heard as well, that I am a bit conflicted because this is a ballot measure and this bill seeks to implement the ballot measure. So there is a need for the bill, but nonetheless, I've heard from CML and in their need as well, and the work that you have done with them and you could continually to do with them, but also hearing from the indigenous community for me hit home as a person of color as well, that again, they want to have greater ownership as part of this process. So to me, yes, we need to implement this ballot measure. And another thing I did not hear as part of this conversation, because I've heard it a couple of times that people said, can we pause? And I did not hear as part of the conversation, if we were to pause, what would happen? Is it something that we have to do right now? Do we have to pass this bill? And it was introduced in a way that was very quickly, so that makes me wonder whether, I know the bill mentions the stakeholding that has been done, and I know you have done the work, right? I'm a new legislator, I've seen you do the work on the floor. I've seen you do the work with us as well, reaching out to us, but ultimately, because of the speedy process that has been part of this bill, it makes me wonder as well. So ultimately, I will vote, but nonetheless, I do feel like this bill put us in a very sticky situation, and I wish that, I know that a lot of bills, oftentimes, not everyone gets what they want 100%, but I think the indigenous community is a big part of this process. They ought to be heard, and so does CML. I mean, as a current city council member, we want to hear that we still are part of this process, because ultimately, local government represent the community, even though we do as well, but they're the closest to the people. So giving them a greater stake in ownership as well is important as part of this process. Thank you.
All right, Rep. Amable.
Thank you. So first I want to say we did set up this Indigenous working group, and that is going to be ongoing. And we know that this isn't perfect, and we will be continuing to fine tune what's in here. And there will be future legislation. There will be, next year, there'll be another bill that helps us address the things that still need to be addressed. And the ballot measure has already taken effect. And we do have to, so the unregulated market is happening right now. And we do, law enforcement and the people who are using these products need to understand what the rules are. We need clarity on that. And we need that now because it's already happening. And in order to implement the will of the voters, we have to set up the regulatory framework and start the licensing and start to do the things that we need to do. And so, yes, we have to do it, and we have to do it now. And that's why I urge you to vote yes.
Thank you, Rep. Amable. So I have some closing comments. This was a ballot measure, right? It doesn't say anything in the ballot measure about indigenous peoples or religious use and the sacred nature of the medicine. And I think what that tells me is that we have a ballot access problem. Because I've been here 30 years, and I used to see a lot of these fly-by-night, come-and-go ballot measures, often out of California, and the voters of Colorado would sniff them out and vote them down. I'm not saying that's the case with this one. Okay, I haven't dug that deep. But if this would have stopped at the first semicolon, it would have just basically decriminalized. But it goes on. It goes on to say establishing a natural medicine regulated access program for supervised care, and it goes on and on and on. It says down about local governments. It says local governments shall be limited to time, place, and manner restrictions. And that, to me, as an attorney, tells me that that's about the lightest authority you give to someone like that. And so as a single subject rule for me here, I know the whole subject is about these medicines, but there's just a lot wrong with this, in my opinion. And to be honest with you, that's why I didn't vote for it when I had the opportunity. So I do agree with you, Rep. Amable, that we're and with you, Rep. Taggart, we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because we have a ballot measure passed by the voters that tells us to do these things. And when you look at it from that perspective, I'm very impressed with the efforts that's been made. I realize for many people it seems rushed. It's the nature of some way things work in this building sometimes, that these bills will get worked on, and then they're introduced and then they're fast-tracked. I personally would prefer a much more open and public process, longer taking, but I've been around long enough to know that that is not always how it works around here. So I admire you for taking this on. I don't think you were the number one proponent on Proposition 122, but yet you recognize our responsibility here. I think you've done a good job. And I think last thing I want to say, first panel of witnesses we had we had the director of DOR, Dora, and CDPHE wasn't here, but we mentioned them too. I heard them give a firm commitment to keep working with the interest groups that we heard from today. And so I don't know whether it's some kind of, we have made some ballot reform measures. It's not lost on me that we had an election omnibus bill heard earlier today, and then we have this one. So, what can I tell you? People, we need to read these ballot measures, and everybody needs to vote. But with that, Vice Chair Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move submitted Bill 290 as amended to the Committee on Appropriation with favorable recommendations.
Good motion, seconded by Representative Valdez. Ms. Shipley, will you poll the committee, please?
Representatives Bockenfeld.
No.
Degree Kennedy.
Yes.
Frizzell excused. Kipp.
Yes.
Lindstedt.
Yes.
Marshall.
Yes.
Taggart.
Yes, but I would like to make a comment. It's because I trust that we'll get this.
Rep. Taggart, unfortunately, we've closed comment time. We're just voting now.
Valdez.
Yes.
Weinberg.
No.
Joseph.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. That passes 8-2. Thank you. And with no further, thank you everybody for sticking with us this afternoon. And with no business remaining before the Finance Committee, the committee is adjourned.